still live? Everything stops. No, we're still here. Alright, still live? We're still here. I was worried for a second. Alright. How's everybody? Or nobody? I don't know if I didn't put it on I didn't put out that we were live on Twitter. Put it on a Blue Sky. Yeah, I remember that. Oh look, Doc's still streaming. Alright, no, it's not made for kids. But like we said, if you're a weird kid who's into politics. A lot of dead air. Why is the... Oh yeah, because there's no new sound on this one. That's why it's so quiet. I was like, what is the... Why is it so quiet? Do 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 do. Oh, hey John, how's it going? The air has died? What do you mean the air has died? Dead air? Just so quiet. Is the music still going? Oh, but no, the problem is we're now on YouTube, so I can't be playing like super stuff that's like very copyrighted, unfortunately. I do love the synthwave remixes though. I think the Big Iron one is my favorite. Where is it? Alrighty. You know what? I should to make this. We're doing some farming. We gotta look the part. Oh. I've been waiting for the weather to get nice so I can crack this out for the hill. Just start dressing. Wait, did the music stop? And then if we really want to look the part. Because I am just metamorphosizing my grandfather. Alright. Wait, where's the noise we have? To the town of our freedom.
Hey, you want to make a bit of money?
You want to make a bit of money?
You should do what I did. Get into farming. See this? I got this. Selling corn.
Came out of the fucking ground.
Comes out of the fucking ground. I couldn't believe it. You see that?
Mitchell and Webb look is
chicken.
wildly underappreciated.
Chicken. You kill it, you got free chicken. You can sell it to people. Or don't kill it. Fucking eggs come out of their arses. Fucking hell. You know sheep? Bit woolly.
Made of wool.
It's wool! Pull it off, sell it, fucking grows back again. You cannot lose.
Meanwhile, there are old scores to be settled at the Dell. Scores like 1-0 and 2-all that have happened in previous years. Who will win this time between Sunderland and Blackburn? Then on Sunday, live, the battle for the Northwest of Shrewsbury meet Macclesfield in a match already being described as on this Sunday. Coming up midweek, the Giants of Charlton play host to the Titans of Ipswich, making them both seem normal-sized. Then Tottenham play Bolton for the second time this season.
The good one is this was all I could think when we made when Doug Ford made like you could buy alcohol in corner stores.
Good morning, John.
Morning, Hugh.
And how are you and your excellent corner shop this fine morning?
Good, thanks, Hugh.
Good. Right. There you go. Loaf of wholemeal, telegraph, and an apple.
Right, Hugh.
Right.
Just thinking, John. Oh, yes, goodness, I'm thirsty. I really am. I've got a tremendous thirst on all of a sudden.
Oh.
Yes, I feel like I should grab something to drink right away. Do you recommend anything?
Well, we have lots of different drinks, as you know, Hugh.
Yes, you do, but I'm so thirsty, I feel like grabbing something right at hand. It's something from this chiller here. Yes, here we go. Export Jürgenbrau. Yes, well, maybe I'll try one of these.
Yes, maybe you will.
Oh, and actually, now I notice this is an alcoholic lager beer, isn't it, John? 10%. Blimey. That's quite a lot, isn't it, John?
Yes, Hugh. It's the most alcohol per milliliter at the lowest cost in this corner shop.
Is it really? How fascinating. Well, it's the continental way, isn't it? In Spain, they wouldn't dream of starting the day without a couple of cans and maybe
Couple of
a
cans.
vodka, probably. So, how much is that?
£2.70, Hugh.
Oh, well, no.
Thank you. Yes,
No,
I'm the
I
night
don't-
streamer.
I don't think I can actually afford the bread, the paper.
The night streamer
an apple,
cometh.
and this drink.
Hell yeah! Great callback to using
Oh, well,
mammal.
so maybe I'll
Fantastic
put
work.
all three of these items back, and maybe get 2 cans of this lager beer that you recommend, just in case one doesn't completely rid me of my perishing thirst.
Yes. Yes, that is the usual solution.
Do you know what? I'm so thirsty. I think I might just crack
Drink
this
this
open
on your
and
porch.
drink it here on the step of your shop.
Of course, Hugh. And why don't you lie down on the pavement afterwards if you're feeling a little bit sleepy?
What an excellent idea.
See you tomorrow.
Although apparently, like, there was reporting from like a couple of stores where there were people who would come and like just clearly they'd like buy like 2 or 3 tall boys, just drink them, just chug them on like outside the store, and then just get back in their car. All right, we got Pulse Panel.
The endless series of controversial cabinet picks. Donald Trump's seemingly endless series of controversial cabinet picks quickened the pulse of American politics this week and threatens to have significant consequences on this side of the border. Meanwhile, conservative
It's
MPs
not
are
just
leaking their discontent
Trump's
about
cabinet
their
that's
leader
being
to rally in Canada.
controversial this
Governor
week
Singh
either.
makes his pitch to deal with affordability concerns, and a cabinet minister apologizes for not being clear enough about his family's indigeneity.
This is such a rough clip.
That I apologize for not being as clear about
what?
my clear about my family history. I apologize that I wasn't as clear as I could have been, and I apologize if that particular way of referring to myself.
What way?
I apologize that it was.
What particular way?
I apologize unequivocally, and I'll end it there.
We'll pick it up there. It's time to bring in our panel of party insiders. Greg McEachern is a former Liberal ministerial staffer.
Not
Ron
great.
is a former communications director for the NDP. And Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager. Good to see you, gang. Happy Friday. Fred, let's start with you. This is the issue you wanted to talk about. Randy Boissonnault saying he's sorry for not being clear enough. His former business partner applied for federal contracts claiming they were an Indigenous-owned business, which Randy Boissonnault says he knew nothing about. And he was identified as a Liberal by the Liberal Party. As
Wait, why is this not coming out of my headphones?
Do I have to but now he's in this mess despite other people are saying it, not him. What do you make of this?
Well, it's odd that you have all these entities unrelated.
Is it just him not saying it?
It's got to be
or is it just other people saying it though?
And there's been a pattern with this minister that I think is very problematic for the Liberals right now. You know, like you said, his business, when he was running the business back in 2020, said that it was a wholly Indigenous-owned business. Mm-hmm. He was the owner, so. How did that branding happen?
He was a co-owner because his business partners caused him no end of troubles, right?
Sure. But wholly owned is what the phrase was too. So it just doesn't add up. And then the Liberals, the party putting it out, and he sits in sat in the Indigenous caucus as well with the Liberals, which, you know, there's allies of Indigenous and other groups that sit in caucuses.
Right.
That's not a major flag there. But it just seems a weird pattern that all these things happen. And we've even
But here's the thing: he wasn't just in the caucus. Like there was that. I think it was that photo. Where was it? I have to pull it up because it make sure I'm actually remembering this correctly. Was this was Nardi's story? Was it? Yeah, because in that photo, where is it? Yeah. Yeah, so this photo, where is it? This is kind of the iffy part. So this photo, so Indigenous Liberal Caucus. And you can see Randy right there. But where is it? Where's the thing I was just reading? Oh, I don't know. I don't think that doesn't feel like it's parliamentary language. But maybe not Polyev. So here, in July 2016, the IPC posted a picture on Instagram of the Indigenous Liberal Caucus's 9 members, including Boissonnault, with caption, "Proud to have elected the largest number of Indigenous MPs ever during the 2015 federal election." So 2 weeks later, it sent out a newsletter that once again featured Boissonnault's picture along with the 8 other members of the party's Indigenous caucus. See, because that's the thing where it's like, why is he the only ally in the caucus? Along with the 8 party. The description above the photo extolled the fact that a total of 9 Liberal Indigenous MPs have formed the largest Indigenous caucus in the Canadian government's history. The goal of this group of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit members is to educate and to initiate dialogue. Between 2016 and 2018, Boissonnault also stated multiple times in and out of the House of Commons he was adopted Cree or non-status adopted Cree. The MP mentioned his adoptive full-blooded Cree great-grandmother 5 times in Parliament from 2016 to 2019. Which apparently is not a thing. Non-status adopted Cree. Yeah, well, I mean, I could even almost imagine an NDP MP saying it too. Because if it was an Indigenous MP, like I'm not saying like I think MP Gazan would say it, but I feel like MP Gazan would probably get away with it more than say Garnet Genuis. I could imagine. But like it's almost like you almost like with this sort of thing that would almost just that would like divert the discussion, because then we're having a discussion about like the language being used rather than the issue at hand. Because it's not just conservatives don't have a monopoly on popping off in question period. That's bipartisan at this point. Maybe the Greens get less of a chance. And Elizabeth May, I wouldn't say she pops off, but she's a assassin with the like sort of rules and procedures. You step out of line, she knows it immediately. All right, let's get to the actual panel.
The ethics probe that is going on with his
Okay,
business
there we go.
dealings and how
Sounds
they're
working
dealing with the
properly.
government. This is a big problem for the Liberals, where it's eating up a lot of oxygen right now. It keeps coming up. There are these text messages from his business partner, former business partner, about how, that Randy was saying this and that about dealing with the federal government. He's a cabinet minister, and the Liberals are in a tough spot here. I don't know how they can deal with this. Whether they, if they were to remove him, it's admitting guilt. But if they keep him, it feels like there's just going to be continuation of problems with this guy.
Greg, it's interesting because in 2019, the party identified him as an Indigenous candidate. I went back and looked at an article on the CBC webpage that has a clarification in the bottom saying that Randy Boissonnault reached out after he was identified as Indigenous and said, I'm not. I was adopted into a family with Cree connections. And it's either he has been very unclear or other people keep making the mistake, but either way, it's not going.
I think it might be a little bit of column A, column B, where it's like maybe he himself has never claimed it, but I don't know if he's been super responsible with clarifying and making sure the record is set.
Going away, and he apologized.
And you can also probably blame that on maybe the party itself, trying to sort of tweak the numbers a little bit, torque the numbers to make it look like they have more than they actually did.
Today, and Pierre Poilievre's called it a fake apology from a fake minister who working for a fake prime minister. Where does this one go, do you think?
Don't bogart my spin, Cochrane. That's like the...
Sorry, man. I'm trying to put the facts out there as they're known.
In prep for this, when I heard this, what Fred wants to talk about, I found a correction September 5th, 2019, more than 5 years ago, that said everything that Randy said. So I would say, if I were the Liberals today, I don't know if I would have put the minister out like that. I would have just been sending that screen cap, September 5th, 2019, where it lays out.
Yeah, but did they find that?
He says he's not.
You went looking for it, but doesn't mean they went
I
looking for it and found it.
I have a different view on communications on this, where there's, there are some things that you don't need to do to add more oxygen. Fred, the Liberal Party has 99 problems. I don't see this as one of, look, I think that people claiming false identity is probably part of this, and it's really bad, and there's lots of examples, so people think that they're going to find a theme around this. I'm not sure outside of post media, this is getting a lot of play. It's confusing and convoluted, and yes, there may be issues around the business part of this, but I think Minister Boissonnault made this very clear in a correction that was published more than 5 years ago.
But Mel, what's interesting is I went looking through the archives to find an instance where Randy Boissonnault claims Indigenous identity. And beyond saying I was adopted into a family and it's gone from Cree lineage to Métis lineage, I have no clear explanation of that. He never says it about himself. He says it about his family, and that doesn't seem to be in dispute. But here we are. And what do you make of all this?
Yeah, I find Pierre Poilievre's response a little bit interesting, and I think this is a delicate
shrimp cocktail. That'll be handy.
Because of what was said or what wasn't said, but also because it's I don't think it's up to us to either accept the apology, but it's also something important. So if there's a few Indigenous people who were quoted in some of the stories that were written about it that were saying that this isn't okay. So I think we listen to Indigenous folks to whether or not the minister's apologies, what he has said, what he has not said, the fact that it wasn't clear, I think that's kind of where we need to lay the weight of what this looks like at. I think the bigger problem is this business tie-in and what comes of this.
Dish of the sea.
Was your point about wholly Indigenous owned, like that, those things are problematic. So I think I hear your point of this is something that the government's going to have to handle, and how do they do that? I don't know. I think that this is something that's going to keep coming up. But on the issue of what Minister Boissonnault has or hasn't said. I think it's just delicate. It's also, you know, that's your family. These things are hard sometimes to talk about. So maybe I'll
Right.
This is my
So,
farm.
Just to close the loop on it, on the business partner, found, I think, they're trying to drag him before the bar of the house, right? Because of his failure to disclose certain things in committee and misrepresenting things, and he's the guy who started the other Randy thing. I mean, could this be that it's just he got into business with the wrong guy? Or you know, what? Or do you think there is something more nefarious with Boissonnault directly?
Well, there's again. Look, it looks like his business partner, if he's not disclosing stuff to the House, that is problematic, and he's got to be called to do that. But that a cabinet minister went into business with someone like this, that is problematic. But at the same time, there's a pattern here with him. And there's another issue that I read in CBC today online, was how, you know, he refers to himself as a non-status adopted Cree, that he was told by an Indigenous researcher he could say, and then it was that researcher saying that's not true. Like, it's just continuation of a pattern.
Yeah, the phrasing. There was a disagreement in what the phrasing should be.
It just keeps coming out, just new statements and changing stories with him that I think really calls into question maybe the business partner wasn't the problem.
Okay. All right.
How the hell do I get out of here?
Moving on to Greg's pick. This is a story my colleague Christian Noel with Radio Canada.
Oh, wait, I'm blind.
He did. Conservative MPs unhappy with being told they're not allowed to ask for housing accelerator money and having their names
Wild
released,
story.
without their knowledge that these are the people who have applied for it. And we had a mayor on from New Brunswick saying,
I never imagined they would have released that without their friggin'
So just the backstory on this is that one day in the House,
knowledge.
Minister Sean Fraser, in response to a question,
I thought they'd done it to get out ahead of the drip,
letters.
but
He
like
said perhaps
it
for
was
the
just
first
like
time, just a
they
letter
got blindsided
from
as
Conservative
wild.
MPs looking for support from the Housing Accelerator program. And I remember thinking at the time, if there's one, there's probably going to be others. And the next couple of days, there were others, and I thought, oh, there's probably still some more that are working their way through the system. So I think now the count is at 17 Conservative MPs that think this is a good enough program to advocate for support in their community from this program. And they got in trouble for it, and they got in trouble by their leader and their leader's office. And I will say this, you know, about members of parliament. Having been a staffer, there are a ton of MPs that can really, you know, get on your nerves. But at the end of the day, they put their name on the ballot and the staffer did not. And the thing that I had the biggest surprise over in that article when it was revealed that in an attempt to get out ahead of Minister Sean Fraser's pushback on this, they released the names, but they didn't tell the 17 MPs that they were going to do it. And that is a hell of a thing to find out if you're a member of parliament and you hear on the news that your name is there, your letter is there. And, you know, the Liberals ran into this a couple years ago. I was a big advocate for an inquiry to be called into the massacre in Nova Scotia. And the Liberals had something around that. And boy, Liberal MPs were really quick to come out and say, no, I did not agree to put my name on that letter.
Yeah.
You do not touch that stuff. It is their reputation. They're the people who have decided to run. And I thought, you know, for a caucus that is really, really strong in terms of caucus management, there's a lot of fear. You know, he's got the carrot and the stick, and the, you know, the carrot obviously is going to be if they win a cabinet post. But all of a sudden, you've got leaks and people aren't happy. I think it was significant.
Yeah, there's a difference, I guess, Mel, between caucus management and caucus discipline. And there's a strong caucus discipline, but what we're seeing now is that, I mean, there's no real disputing this story from anybody or saying it isn't true. What does it say that this many MPs or people in the caucus are frustrated with being told you can't advocate for your constituents?
Right.
Of course they're going to be pissed.
People, when they run for, you know, elected office, they run because they want to make a difference in their local community. They want to, you know, make things better. They want to help people. And this program is a way for them to do that. So they probably, you know, saw
Can't believe I got that.
what they could go get from the fund, and we're probably working with local stakeholders, probably working with people like mayors, like other folks in the ridings to get this going. And to hear that you can't do that is probably not fun. So I appreciate the discipline. What I'll say from a communications perspective is I used to hate when my MPs would stand with other MPs to make an announcement. It was always like, if you have something important to say, you know, it would be great if you could stand on your own and do it. So I understand the how do we communicate this while we're still opposition? But like, you go to Ottawa to make a difference. You go to Ottawa to make things better, and being told, no, you can't do this. And it's
God
so
damn it, that's not
partisan
squid.
that now you can't even access the funds, which means you can't help the people in your riding. To me, is overplaying. It's bad. And then how do you go back home and say, my guy is in it for you, but actually, no, he's not, because he doesn't want me to help you, and we can help you with this. It's just bad communication. So I don't think it's going to help those MPs in the riding.
Fred, we talked to the mayor of Butternut Valley in New Brunswick last night. I mean, these three of us are from Atlantic Canada, you're from smaller town, Ontario. You know how tough it is to get money for water and sewer. This is a fund ready-made for it, and their MP Rob Moore is not allowed to ask for it.
Right.
I mean, that's not gonna, I mean, I know they got the big lead and stuff, but that's the sort of stuff that bites you in small places like Atlantic Canada, doesn't it?
Trap bobber.
It does if you're not disciplined in telling the story about the problem with that whole program, right? And that's where the Conservatives, I think, made these caucus members. If the leader doesn't believe this program is real, that it'll ever work, and that it's something that's actually going to build homes, the Conservative
it doesn't build homes; it builds the infrastructure that is required for homes.
Yeah, maybe
right?
that'll take a long time to do it. He thinks he has a better plan that'll do it much faster. So if the Conservatives believe in that and that's their message, they should be united in doing that. But I understand at the same time, when your small town mayor is asking you, hey, can you pitch in and do that, that it puts them in a tough spot. But again, they, if they are going to be disciplined as well as they've been doing, they need to go to their mayors and say, this is a bad program. This isn't actually going to do anything for you.
Okay, but there's 180 communities, give or take, that have signed up for this program. And there's people like Mike Moffat, who likes the GST cut Pierre Poilievre is promising, but also really likes the broad outlines of the housing, et cetera, fund. So you need both. And it seems like for partisan reasons, this is where we are, right? I mean, this program, 180 municipalities signed up for it, and a lot of mayors are coming out saying they want it. Is there a risk here for the Conservatives if a lot of these people in these communities, in all the local news hits, are saying, we need this program that he's threatening to take away?
I don't think so, because between now and the election, not a single house will be built by this program.
That's they keep doing this.
Of about 600.
The infrastructure fund builds the infrastructure the houses need to be connected to.
40 of those will be affordable housing. That's an announcement that happened today, and it's at a site, LeBreton Flats, where people were hoping that we're going to have an arena downtown. Might be familiar outside of Ottawa. So I think there are some things underway. The other thing about the GST cut, one of the other mayors quoted in the story is from the Kamloops riding. And he talks about trying to build I believe it's a seniors home with 100 beds. And so the GST cut doesn't really
won't do that, right?
But and it's about the water and sewer that they need in order to build a facility with 100 beds. So
there we go.
I think, and the other part of your point, Fred, is the mayors, the 177 communities outside of Quebec that have participated in this, they believe this is a real program. And so if they think that this program is going to be cut by the Conservatives, they've got a bit of the Conservatives have a bit of an issue trying to reconvert these folks.
Okay, Mel, we're going to talk more about housing between now and the election. See how many houses get built. Mel, you wanted to talk about Jagmeet Singh's pitch on affordability. He gave a big speech in Toronto that I don't think got a lot of coverage.
Tax cuts.
Swift showed up the same day, but he laid out some ideas. What do you want to focus on there?
I mean, I'm super excited that Taylor's in Canada too, so I get it. But no, yeah, I really liked the announcement yesterday. I always find it interesting when Jagmeet goes to that business room and kind of talks directly to them and says, we're going to do things that you're not going to be happy about, and we're going to do things that, you may be happy about. So I thought that was an interesting speech. But what I really liked is New Democrats, we were talking about this actually last week, how do you show people that you can help them today, tomorrow, in a few weeks from now? Usually, the NDP has these programs that they want to bring in that will make a real difference in people's lives, but maybe it takes a while for folks to feel the impact, for folks to see it impact their family budgets. Whereas, the announcement that he said of taking the tax off of essentials is something that people could see right away, that people could see it having an impact.
Home heating, cell phone bills, internet, diapers, kids' clothes, these sorts of things, prepared meals.
So I thought that was a really smart announcement of, we care about tackling the systems that are making things harder for people, but we are also listening to folks. We hear that you're having a hard time, that you're having to stretch your budget, and this is what our proposal is to help you in that. So I thought that was a smart announcement from Jagmeet yesterday.
Fred, it's a play on the affordability agenda, right? After we talked at length last week
Probably
about
not
the
as good.
Democrats sort of losing that message, the new Democrats are focusing on things that do actually sort of hit people, not just the very vulnerable, into that middle income earners as well.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think this is a squid.
Welcome to the show. It's been 2 years we've been dealing with affordability.
Welcome
It's
to
good
the
that
show.
another party is finally trying to put something down on it. I think it's great.
That's a huge compliment, Mel. You should absolutely take that.
But no, look, it is good to see
God
that
damn
the NDP is in favor of some tax cuts. It's not typically the party of that. Of course, they have massive programs that they want to fund. So I don't know how all of this is going to work, where they're going to cut tax and build up and expand all the other programs that they want. But
Yes, as opposed to the deeply detailed policy clarity that your crowd has put on the table and how they're going to pay for everything.
Got
But
him.
to be fair I think Jack Layton has wanted to take the HST.
Yeah, I got numbers on the.
all the way back. But,
Yo,
Greg,
did
this
he
is,
just
I
walk
hope that
up
everyone is moving in this
slowly
direction,
and down
Fred's
smash?
got it.
He did.
All of these affordability things, we're seeing this in the Nova Scotia election. It's giving up revenue, right? When there's still all these other things you have to deal with. But they've got a coherent message on this. What's your thought there?
Yeah, the accounting's separate. This was exactly what we were told following the election in the United States, that people want to hear.
I know this is riveting
And the
content,
challenge
but
is
you're the one watching
it
it on a
didn't
Saturday,
really break
so.
through. There are challenges, but you spoke last night. I think you really upset the apple
How many
cart
do I
when you
have?
gave a
6.
projection about what it would be like.
I need like 2 more.
With, under a conservative government, if they cut the CBC and they cut the subsidy for newspapers, we're going to have even bigger challenges. I think about what I did on 2 national campaigns, trying to get the message out, and the challenge right now. Good announcement. It's what people are supposed to want. How much of it actually broke through? I think I look at that and then I think, wow, what's it going to be like during an election when you're competing with all of this?
I think it's just about being consistent. Like the Jagmeet just now needs to be consistent. The party just needs to be consistent.
many
They need to
sea
be
cucumbers.
Like Polyeva's done.
everywhere,
It's the
right?
same
Like, you
message
just need-
nonstop,
Yeah, and
but
you need
it
to share this
penetrates,
everywhere.
right? Yeah.
Maybe the announcement wasn't, totally covered yesterday. That's fine. You'll have opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. You just have to take that opportunity. But the one thing that I also wanted to add was,
You get both.
you talk about revenue, the NDP has a plan to bring in revenue that is a little bit different from what the Liberals have put forward. They've said that they're not afraid to go get money from those that they consider the ultra-rich. So.
Right.
That's also something to consider when you're looking at balancing the cost.
Oh, there's a little
structure.
counter up in the
Right.
left-hand
Okay,
corner.
look,
I just
I
noticed.
do want to.
You can't see it because
A
Power and
lot has
Politics
happened
is
since we sort of digested
covering
the
it.
U.S. results last week.
Oh, I think this is
the
one too.
cabinet appointments, Fred, are interesting. It started off with like Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz, who are pretty conventional
Lee
Republicans.
Stefanik. Oh,
and then
never
you got
mind.
Matt
Tuna.
Gaetz, Tulsi Gabbard, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Secretary of Defense and Pete Hegseth, who came off the Fox and Friends couch, and now we're finding out about sexual assault allegations against him from out in California. Just what do you think Prime Minister Trudeau and whoever is Prime Minister after the next election is going to be dealing with when they go to Washington? This is an interesting dynamic.
Come on.
And it's interesting where Trudeau and gang have dealt with Trump before, but that was a different.
Was it ever?
Yeah. Trump 1.0 is nothing like Trump 2.0. This is a whole different ballgame. I think when Trump was first elected in 2016, he was surprised as many were.
He was the dog who caught the car in some ways.
He
right?
didn't have an agenda, didn't have a plan. He has something now, and he has allies
not
that
a-
he have really ingratiated themselves with him, and he's putting them in
Squid.
key points and parts. Marco Rubio, that was an excellent appointment. Full disclosure, I supported him when he ran for president against Trump in 2016. But when I saw Matt Gaetz, and everyone's jaw dropped. I don't know how. Trump 1.0 is about drain the swamp. This seems to be nuke the swamp. This is just a fascinating group of people. I am looking forward to see who's going to be the ambassador to Canada. That's going to be super interesting, and obviously I'm kind of hoping that Hulk Hogan will get that role. Childhood hero. At the same time, the funny thing is, it's actually realistic. It could happen. Hulk Hogan could be our ambassador.
There is a
It's not, yeah,
which
which
is
not beyond the
which is
realm of
bizarre to think about.
possibility at all.
Greg, Look, the Senate is going to have a confirmation role in all of this.
But I mean, at that
Obviously,
point,
the
might as
Matt
well.
Gaetz
Go for it.
one, because of the ethics report.
Go
and the
for
criminal
Hulk
investigations, that's a
Hogan.
challenge. But RFK Jr. is,
Why
if
not?
you're charitable, a vaccine skeptic, but he's probably anti-vax. He would be in charge of like vaccine development and approval if there's another pandemic. Like, roll back in time and imagine what COVID would have been like. Would you have even been able to do Operation Warp Speed with a guy like RFK heading that agency?
Yeah, or I saw on Twitter, and it's a bit, flip, but make polio great again. I mean, Robert Kennedy Jr., his own family has disavowed him on, the entire Kennedy clan, and a couple of them had, later generations, Kathleen.
Yeah, send him to the bare facts.
Of a state, some of them were in Congress. None of them want anything to do with him. It's really easy to joke. There's some really funny jokes out there, and as much as I don't want to be trite, there is something about humor in politics where I've always learned, or I had learned to be careful, because it's kind of like full saturation when you become a joke, and usually it takes a long time for that to happen. When I worked in provincial politics and the legislature was sitting late, I used to like to take a cab and ask the cab driver what he was thinking. Often would refer to Bruce McKinnon or Michael Dieter's editorial cartoons, because that's where it kind of crystallized.
Yeah.
The humor and the mocking moved really quickly on this. And for a lot of people who said that
Dieter,
Trump was going to be like this,
still
and people who
gainfully
tried to say he
employed for the
wasn't,
Hill Times.
within days. I mean, Matt Gaetz, I don't know, I wouldn't want my kids to be around that person. And there are senators who had said things around him, and now they're trying to choke them back because Trump is president again. And we
still maintain that the bare facts is an RCMP seizes front. Is that, do they? I mean, it is really close now that you mention it. I've never thought about that, but it is like, that's very funny.
Have to face whether or not they're going to support some of these appointments.
Well, I mean, look, the Matt Gaetz thing, there is a House ethics report that may not see the light of day because he's resigned from his seat in Congress for this, which trying to create a procedural reason for it wouldn't be released. But it's about an investigation into this allegations against him of cross-border underage
Why does it say
and the
America's Ottawa Embassy
she was
is in
17 when he had sex with her. And this guy is being nominated to be the top law enforcement official, the job that Bobby Kennedy Sr. held in the JFK White House. So that's where we are. So Mel, just last word, just thoughts from the U.S. and just there's all the challenges on the policy front, and then there is the
literally a 3-minute walk. That's
well.
nuts.
Right.
I never
it's
thought
almost
about
like
that.
Satire. If you were going to watch Veep,
That's so funny.
Totally opposite is what it seems like it's happening in the States. And for folks who were saying, oh, don't worry about Donald Trump, don't worry about how he's going to be a president. To me, seeing some of these announcements would worry the heck out of me. For plenty of reasons, but particularly the appointments that we've heard as of late. And I think, to your question earlier about how this affects Canada and how we can work with these folks.
There's a
gonna
pool
be
bar
steep
like
learning
2
curve for a lot
down
of
from
those folks that are
Fairfax.
put in
It is
those
really fun,
positions. And what do you do, on this side of the border to make sure that...
Because you can get a can of PBR and a shot of Jameson for $11. That plus that's a great night. Yeah, the Dominion, exactly. Because half the time there's no one in there, so you can just play pool all night and And I'm not saying that to denigrate it. I'm glad.
Canada's interests are front and center is going to be an extra level of challenging for, something that we've already all said is going to be challenging to begin with.
And last time the government was in a majority, high in the polls, had a lot of political capital, was brand new, and we're not at that stage of the political cycle.
David, if I could just quickly say, I've not received as much feedback on anything as I did on Mel's comments last week, and it was incredibly positive. I heard from so many people. Again, well said.
All right, and you can watch it on YouTube. We try to post it every week. Fred Delory, Greg McKecker, Melanie Riche, thanks for being here every Friday.
You jerk.
All right, you curious, you courageous hurly-burlyites. Time to summon all that courage, because today on the pod, a pollster panel laying bare the current state of politics in the US and Canada. The remarkable Trump comeback and election victory is only a week and a half in the rearview mirror. I want to look at some of the factors that drove that result and how that compares to Canada, whether those same conditions exist in Canada, all of those conditions exist in Canada, or what's unique about Canada.
Ooh.
And all that through what does the data say? So with me to examine those questions and the follow-ups that cascade from there, 2 of the best in the business.
Oh, yeah,
David
purple.
Coletto and Kyla Rennell-Fitch, both appearing on the podcast for the second time. David is one of Canada's best-known public opinion analysts and social researchers. He's the founder, chair, and CEO of Abacus Data. He has a PhD in political science from the University of Calgary, and he's an expert on voting behavior and the intersection of public opinion and public policy. Not only that, David teaches at the graduate program of political management at Carleton. Kyla started her career with me at the Gandalf Group, but I think it's safe to say she's now successfully flipped the mentor-mentee relationship. She's a pollster, data scientist, and educator, holding a Master of Science in Analytics from the University of Chicago and a Master of Political Management from Carleton, where she teaches political data management in the Clayton H. Riddell Graduate Program. In 2021, she founded her own full-service polling firm, Relay Strategies, based in Ottawa. Oh, she's also a proud daughter of Humboldt, Saskatchewan. Kyla, David, welcome back to the podcast. Great to have you here.
Thanks for having me, David.
So the conceit of this episode
Mom's making lentil
is
soup.
that I know that you both have looked extensively at the American data and results, and you've also
Why are you letting this young girl do archery?
With what's going
That's
on
incredibly.
In so
why does she have a bow? Archery is incredibly dangerous for a girl her age. She could poke her eye out.
A million theories about why the election in the States went as it did. I want to run through the ones that interest me. And you can tell me whether you think they were important or not in the U.S. But what I also want to know is, does that dynamic exist in Canada, and to what extent, and to whose benefit? Okay. So,
I should go.
Let's start
sift that
with men moving more conservative. So men generally tend to tilt conservative in any event, but it seems to have been more pronounced in this election campaign, and notably young men moving conservative. So Kyla, if I could start with you, how much of a factor do you think that was in the U.S. election? And what is that look like in Canada?
Yeah, I think definitely a factor, but I think an overblown one.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of sort of panic in the response, and a feeling that especially young men have become much more conservative. I've spent for the past few years, I've worked for a Democratic polling firm in the US, and really for the last year I've been especially focused on understanding the perspectives of young men, because this is what we've been hearing so much, is young men are becoming more and more conservative. I would kind of flip it a little bit, and it's that young women are becoming so progressive, and as a point of comparison, young men look conservative, but men tend to skew conservative. And if you look at kind of the context of the ideological perspectives of young men relative to men older than them, they're actually more progressive. It's just that they are men, and men tend to be a little bit more conservative. The one area that I will kind of give more space or credibility to is that you see young men are they're very polarized. I think of them as like very much a product of the current political environment and the online discourse. So young men are really progressive, or young progressive men are really progressive. Their attitudes don't look that different from progressive women. It's just that there are a lot more of the progressive women. And young Republican men in the US are very conservative. And that is actually where you are seeing a lot of the kind of backlash against, I would say, gender progress, a lot of discontent with young women, feeling, I had asked this question about a month ago, asking what
Why is my wife
young
stuck
men
behind
think are the greatest problems facing young men and boys and young women. The number 2 item that Republican men
How did you
choose
get back
for
there?
one of the greatest problems of a dozen different things that are facing young women is that they're being brainwashed. So there is this feeling among young Republican men, just that is where you see this kind of like big divide and kind of the themes of the manosphere.
Ooh, I can put a pearl in there?
Right. Okay, thank you. David, what's your take on that?
Well, I think, I actually think there's a bigger factor. I think I disagree with a little with Kyla in that, yes, young women are very much progressive, but I do think men have moved, young men, than they would have been, when I was in that age cohort. And I'm talking about 18 to 29-year-olds, right? And when you look at that cohort, both in the United States and in Canada, I think you see the same, trend happening in the UK, a lot of Europe, is that there is a sizable portion of them, I wouldn't say all of them, that I think they have a sense that they don't have a place today. The economy isn't working for them. They're having a harder time around questions around masculinity. This is go beyond even my expertise to try to get at what the psychology is there. But I do think that the data that I see shows a clear difference, right? Just looking at Canadian data, I brought together 4 of the surveys that we did since September. So I've got a data set of 10,000 respondents, and I went deep in looking at the differences between young men and young women. Donald Trump, young Canadian men have Donald Trump's favorability is +3 in Canada. It's -48 among young women. That is as big a gender gap as I have almost ever seen on a political figure who, yes, is polarizing, but, for a young audience, to see such different views around gender tells me something's happening there, right? And they are not more likely, interestingly, to say the country's headed in the wrong direction. They're not more likely to have a different set of issues than younger women, but I think they're experiencing both the economic, social, and political environments in different ways that are pushing them almost in opposite directions in a lot of ways. And so I think that's part of the story of what happened in the United States. I don't think it's enough to explain Trump's victory, but when I look at a state like New Jersey, for example, and it only went for Kamala Harris by 4 points, right? Or New York, where we saw the margin close, those are clear indicators that people who have probably not voted for Donald Trump or any Republican for a long time did last Tuesday. And I think younger Americans are a big part of that story.
Well, to follow up on that, don't you show Poilievre at about 45 points among 18 to 29-year-old men? I don't think I've seen that. I don't think I've seen that in an election before. Young men are the demographic in which he is the most popular, except for conservatives, right? If you take out the partisan tinge to somebody, that demographic is the best predictor of whether somebody's going to have a positive or negative view of Pierre Poilievre, right? And they are not more likely to have a negative view of Justin Trudeau than older Canadians. But if I had told you, David and Kyla, 2 years ago that Justin Trudeau would be more popular among those over 60 than he is among those under 30, including women, mind you, you'd say that's crazy. That's not how we understand Canadian politics today. So something's going on, and I think the economic situation is a big driver to that.
Yeah, just to clarify, the gender gap was enormous and a very significant factor. I just think that a lot of the way that it is described is sort of in like the cartoonish Joe Rogan type division. And I think that a lot of the divide is actually more pronounced in between, especially among young men, young women, is more pronounced in Canada than it is in the United States. Not necessarily because I think Donald Trump presents a figure and because their system is so much more polarized than ours, that creates a certain degree of sorting. And in Canada, I think that the barrier to entry to be a conservative looks different because Pierre Poilievre is not viewed as extreme of a figure as Donald Trump. And I think that the economic discontent is so pronounced among young people, especially among young men, that I think that is leading to why there's a lot more openness to conservatives and also to just self-identification as a conservative ideologically, aside from their vote, which I think is the really interesting thing longer term. Like people can park their vote temporarily, but if this is having an impact on how they view themselves just as a voter moving forward, that is the thing that just has more long-term and interesting implications.
Also, it's very surprising because I've been like the people who are like anywhere from like Coleto's age to David Hurley. Like he put out that polling. I think I even texted Fred Delory about this because he was, or I DM'd him because he like he tweeted out. He's like, because when where is it? I don't want to like, but I'll just say what I said. But he tweeted this where it was like it was after so Coleto put out men 18 to 29 in Canada vote share 48% said they were voting for actually I can pull this up, probably easier. Yeah, there it is. So men 18 to 29 in Canada vote is wait, why can't you see it? Oh, because it's that part. I keep forgetting you can't see that one when I pull it up. So yeah, it was like men 18 to 29 in Canada vote 48% for Conservative, 22% Liberal, 15% NDP. Pierre Poilievre's net favorables plus 28, Trudeau's minus 36, Donald Trump's net favorables plus 3. Feel Canada's heading in the right direction, 31%. Ideology ID left 30%, center 39%, right 30%. Wait. And then Fred was like, young voting age men in Canada significantly liking Donald Trump more than Justin Trudeau is not something I thought possible just a few years ago. And I just DM'd him like, that's probably because you aren't hanging around like college age men. Because that I could have told you that in 2016, that Donald Trump was probably more popular than Justin Trudeau among like men my age. And yes, I'm still calling myself. I'm only 2 years older than this cohort. I don't turn 32 till Saturday. But yeah, like it was like I just like that, like because like the net favorable. This sort of like true, like because it's like obviously this is a complete different question because it's like people are like, do you like Trudeau? And like when you're asking Canadian men whether they like Donald Trump, they have also that level of disconnect too, where they can make it like they can say like, oh yeah, I love Trump, and it doesn't really affect them that much. But like this really like this sounds super right or super correct. About a third with slightly more people calling themselves center, and I'd probably say there's a lot more overlap on this side. I think that's probably like that's about that. This is not surprising. What was surprising was like the men older than me, like who are in like Coleto's age group. I don't think Coleto was like was surprised by it, or he didn't express any. But like Delory being like, I didn't think this would be possible. Like this is just a few years ago. This was probably the same thing. It was just nobody cared to ask. Or at least to do specific polling.
So if you were to try to sort out, I think I know what your answer is, but I
or
do
to
want
even
to kind of
compare
understand the
Justin
interplay
Trudeau's likability to
of
Trump's
economics
probably.
and identity. So
I was going to Algonquin in 2016 as a bit of an older student, and yeesh, young dudes were more wildly conservative than when I first went to college at 18. Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I went back to Algonquin for journalism in 2017. Like September 2017, 2018, sort of, I think. And yeah, no, absolutely. And it was like they were already fairly conservative. Like I think there's probably that there may be more like the ones that are conservative are more intense in their conservativeness, maybe, where it's more explicit and like obvious. So like maybe you just wouldn't have noticed as much before. But yeah, no, this wasn't shocking at all. Where was it? The English teacher has a really good bit on it. I love your daughter. What do you have to offer? Nothing. Only this. Teacher. Where's the clip? Where is it? No, I don't want a Facebook video of it. Why are all of these Facebook? God dang it. It was a very good clip. And now it's been so long trying to find it where it's just, I've completely missed the moment. Can I find it in text? Oh yeah, it's the official trailer. But there's one part in it that's just... But also, this is a very good show, and if you haven't seen it, it's on Disney Plus, and it's very
This is
funny.
Mr. Marquez. He is here to teach you all about non-binary. A non-binary person is somebody who does not identify as male or female.
Like a hermaphrodite.
No. Yes. Not at all. And that word is not in use anymore, is it?
I don't know.
There you go.
An F?
With grades like this, I'm gonna have to hit the corner, sir.
No vaping. I can smell it. No, you can't.
You're being investigated.
Why doesn't Marky ever get investigated for all that stuff he says?
Well, there he is. Eric Not So Speedy Gonzalez, 1751. Wow.
The kids this year, they're not into being woke anymore.
It's circled back
It's
around.
circled all the way around.
They're saying the R word again.
Aren't we getting behind on these state
Circled all the way back around, which is, it absolutely, like, and it's like where, I think it was more, I think just the general posture rather than like the makeup, I think, where it's more just sort of like they're sort of, it's just the sort of like the nature of young people to rebel against the older generation. So if the older generation is being very like politically correct and sort of thing, that they're just going to intentionally do things that are not that.
It's tough to...
That was a whole lot of lead up for just nothing. No
to be a young
payoff.
person generally. I don't know that it's a tougher time to be a young man than a young woman. Young men might think it is, but I doubt that that's objectively true. And so there's an economic thing here, but there's also what you were talking about, which is are men valued? Or I'm always told I should be different. I should restrain all of my instincts and impulses, and everybody else but me needs help in this society.
Everyone says restrain all my instincts and impulses, and it's like, what kind of instincts and impulses do you have? And I'm not saying Hurley has them, but it's like, that's just, I don't think that's what they're saying.
What's the balance there in Canada, in your view?
Well, I think it's if I had to put a numeric balance there, I think it's still 70% economic and 30% identity. I don't think it is all driven by that, but the economic makes the identity part feel more present, right? Because if things were going pretty well, if young people felt that they could buy a home, if, you know, and you can't forget that it takes a long time for gender roles and values to evolve. So even if we know that younger Canadians, particularly Gen Z, have way more progressive values when it comes to a lot of issues than any generation before them, there's still an embedded view that if you're a guy, you probably should be able to be the one who helps pay most of the rent in a relationship, or if you know, or carry more of the burden in terms of the household. Now that's not needs to be true, and in fact, women we know are more likely to get a post-secondary degree in Canada now if you're under the age of 40. They're probably more likely to be higher income earners than men. So there's some statistics that show that those gender roles have shifted, but I don't think the expected gender role has fully shifted. And so in a tougher economic environment where the cost of living is just bearing down on young people in every single way, I just think it accentuates that identity part of it and makes men feel even less able to deliver the expectations that so many people, their parents, grandparents' generations might have had on them and maybe still do.
Interesting. Kyla, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that there's an expectations gap. And even if some of these things, when the economy felt better for younger people, maybe it wasn't triggering these same feelings because you were in a position to, I don't know about provide, but to financially succeed, or have it not be that different than what you would have anticipated, say, what your life would look like if you were in high school when you tried to think of what your life would look like when you were 28, for example. Now I think there is that growing delta between what people thought their lives would be like. And I think maybe young men are socialized in a different way than young women, where young women aren't expected to be, we're not raised to be breadwinners or to think of ourselves in that way. And maybe even that's like an outdated way, but I still think it's like, it's a part of the culture. And I think that's a big part of why you do have that kind of some men looking for answers in other places and validation in other places of that experience, because there is that disappointment and I think shame. I think that not having the economic future that you thought that you would, I think that is shame provoking, and more so for men than for women.
And why don't young women in Canada follow their male counterparts to Polyev?
I mean, they are in some cases.
They are, not to the same extent, but
let's pull up the other Coletto numbers. Where are they? Women with children under 5 years old. So the main target of the National Child Care Program, a huge target of liberals sort of like try to keeping them on side. Like that's a major sort of, I don't know, leg or plank of their coalition. Put a lot of effort in try to keeping this specific demographic on side. Now let's see the polling. Oof. 36% conservative, 22% liberal, 22% NDP, 5% bloc. 2021 vote for 42% liberal, 30% conservative. So you see, it's all just been the liberals bleeding to either NDP or conservative. Conservatives actually, oh no, never mind. Conservatives or the NDP dropped by. Oh wait, no, they've gone up. Sorry, I'm losing it. They went up by 6. Poilievre's net favorables among women plus 14. Justin Trudeau's minus 30. He's down there. Trudeau's down where Trump is with women. Trump's slightly in better shape. Feel Canada's headed in the right direction. 29%. Ideology, 26% left, 52% center. That's interesting. I mean, I guess I'm just surprised that's so much less of a split, that it's so much centrist. I don't know, maybe that's maybe I don't want to like do pop psychology on women, but it's like maybe having a young child makes you more like centrist. You're probably less radical when you got a 4-year-old to take care of. Which I could imagine. I'm not saying it's true. I'm just saying it wouldn't shock me if that's the reason. But then there was the other. Oh wait, no, never mind. I don't want to do that. Coletto had, because I think he had racialized Canadians. Racialized Canadians, 42% for the Conservatives, 23% NDP, 20% Liberal. Oh, and there was okay. So they had a slight edge in 2021. So that's interesting. Poilievre's favorables, probably one of the lowest we've seen out of the 3 we've looked at so far. Minus 34 for... Racialized Canadians have a slightly less worse view of Donald Trump than they do of Justin Trudeau. That's incredible. That's wild. Like, they don't really like either of them, but slightly dislike Trudeau more. Men aged 20... women aged 18 to 29. That was the one I wanted to find. So, vote right now. He doesn't have the 2021 vote, which is a bummer. But 34% for Conservative, 25% NDP, 21% Liberal. Poilievre's net favorables minus 7. So, okay, so that's the lowest we've seen. Donald Trump minus 46. Oh, maybe I guess women just tend to be, or at least in this polling, are tending towards the center. Although they do tend to lean much further to the left, I guess, on this side. Not great numbers if you are a liberal. Suboptimal. Fantastic if you're a conservative, as they've been for 2 years.
They are voting conservative at a much
Max
higher
Bernier's flashy shirt's still not helping him make inroads with women. Yeah, like, what else? What do they want?
rate than they would have in
women
2015.
Do I reach these
the conservatives are
kids?
still winning among young women, which is like that is a profound difference. And yeah, and the liberals from my latest polling
All right,
in third place among that cohort, like that is an untenable position if you are the Liberal Party to be polling that far behind among young women and to have the conservatives
Young
doing that
women,
well.
young men.
Okay,
racialized
so there's something going on
Canadians,
with young people. Then
working
It's not
class
just
Canadians, middle class Canadians, and those working hard to join it, as it were.
Men.
Well, it's every
So
age
that's-
cohort, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a true wave sweep. It's everyone. It's hard to point out like this versus that. It's the across the board.
Right. Okay, I want to harken back a couple of decades to a less gray version of Hurley, one who aspired to having actual biceps. When I was in the thick of government, there was nothing more satisfying than when new policy started to work the way it was supposed to fix what was
Where's my
clearly a
wife?
problem. We've been talking here
There
for
you
the
are.
last few weeks about the rise of copper theft in
that was
Canada
sweet.
and the havoc it wreaks on our communities and public
Havoc.
safety. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS, believes industry and all levels of government must collaborate to address it. On the provider side, there's new early warning surveillance technology and other enhanced security measures they're investing in. But on the government side, let me be blunt. We need stricter penalties for thieves, some actual deterrence, new policy. The best practice examples are out there. Copper theft was costing the British economy an average of £1 billion a year. In 2012,
should've made
British
Squid
Transport
Bay.
Police
That's
launched
what I should've
Operation
done.
Tornado
I'm an idiot.
to trace sellers of scrap metal and make it infinitely more difficult to pass on illegally obtained copper and other metals and punish those who try. In 1 year, a 51% drop in the crime. The UK also requires everyone who sells scrap metal to show proof of identity. Many of our provinces have also implemented this, but not all. It would also help if all provinces followed the lead of New Brunswick and Alberta, banning cash-in-hand payments for copper cable and scrap metal. Untraceable
Yeah,
crime
just stop
is successful crime.
buying the fucking stolen
Finally,
copper would
provincial
help.
scrap and metal dealer regulations need to be updated. Thieves are getting creative. We need to cut their source of resale. Updating these regulations will help do just that. Hurly-burlyites, I feel I'm on pretty solid ground when I say nobody wants to put up with essential service outages because thieves are cutting copper wire.
10
It's
today,
a problem
damn.
industry and policy can fix, and we should do it. Okay, so let's flip the angle here. The Democrats appeared to be counting on a tsunami of women to counteract this male trend toward Trump. And they heavily
Wait, when was
emphasized
this
issues
released?
of special appeal to women, whether that be choice. In particular, they profiled women and in their campaign in a way that the Republicans certainly did not. And that turnout did not happen, right? So when you think of the Liberals here in Canada with their feminist government, with their pro-choice positioning, with their climate agenda, they should be expecting...
See, if I'm going to do some pop punditry, I think those things work best when things are already going well. I think it's just basic Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where if the sort of baseline of like the essentials for life, gas, food, and like energy, whatever it is, gas, electricity, hydro, making those sort of baseline bare necessity payments is, if that's in question, you can't then move up the hierarchy of needs to like then care about the climate. Where, I forget who, someone said it to me, one of my friends, where it's like, it's hard to care about Canada's 2030 climate goals or whenever our next climate goal is down the line. It's hard to really care about that when you're not sure how you're going to pay rent at the end of the month. Like the more like precarious, I guess, that a person's sort of like financial or economic situation is, the shorter their sort of horizons are. Like if you're living paycheck to paycheck, your horizon is 2 weeks, and that's because you can't really you can't really plan further ahead than that, because there can always be like an emergency that'll like cut your whole like budget and shred it to ruins or whatever.
The votes of women in this country, and they're not getting them, are they? Why not?
Well, Kyle, I'll start, but I think you've got a really good answer to this. But I look at my data and I say, David, it's because those issues that you just listed aren't as salient among men or women right now, right? The issues are the cost of living, housing, and healthcare. And this sense of scarcity that I describe that has kind of taken over the public's mindset, right? The things I need in my life, some of them I used to expect I could get, harder to get, more expensive. And if I have them, I'm worried I'm going to lose them, right? Women more likely to, particularly older women, to think about healthcare as something that's incredibly scarce. And if I lose my family doctor, I don't know where I'm getting another one. But the same sense of scarcity is around housing and other forms of whether it's food, energy, you name it.
Oh, it's for the special order.
I
think
that just completely overwashes any attempt by the Liberals to try to frame at least the choice right now in a different sense. That sense of scarcity is universal, which is why, as Kyla mentioned earlier, we are seeing a blue wave wash over the entire country across every region and demographic, because that issue affects everybody. And it's such a hard issue for any incumbent government in its 9th year to overcome.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's a condescending proposition, right? Like, why aren't women treated like economic voters? Women are economic voters. Like, we spend money. Single women are more likely to be homeowners in this country. All of these things, it's like treating half of the population with kid gloves, that if I say that this is a feminist budget, that therefore that should feel warm and tingly. And it's why wouldn't the issue set be the same, maybe a little bit different. And I would say, to caveat, I don't consider abortion in this category in the United States. This was a very motivating issue for women. If that issue hadn't existed, one, we wouldn't have seen young women vote in the way that they did with the margin that they did, given especially among progressive young women, their concerns about the war in Gaza. But they came out for Harris because of abortion. And it was the top voting issue among Democrats, period. So I would not consider that into like the woman camp of like, like a lipstick feminism or something like that. That is something different. But I think not treating women like economic voters is missing the point of what women care about and where we are in this economic.
Okay, so that's a really compelling point, but I want to fight with you about abortion, because I was told ever since
maybe don't cut the women off. The woman pollster off when she's explaining to you how women feel about politics.
But I've been told, even when Biden was still the candidate, that this was going to motivate turnout against the Republicans, that this was going to be the issue that drove the election. This was not the issue that drove the election. And the Democrats, I mean, in one respect, the story of this election is not that more people voted for Trump. They actually didn't. It's that fewer people voted Democratic. There's 9 million missing Democratic votes from Biden to Harris. So instead of Dobbs supercharging turnout in this election, more women stayed home and didn't come out and vote for Kamala Harris, then voted for Joe Biden.
I would actually say maybe definitely the 9 million missing Democratic votes. I hear you on that, but also what would the vote have been without abortion as a risk?
Ooh, Elvis jewelry.
It was
cool.
without that and without Donald Trump as the candidate that Kamala Harris was running against, the Democrats would have been in an absolute desperate situation, given where perceptions of the economy are.
Right. Okay.
That's absolutely correct. I agree entirely with that.
So let's get to the meat of this matter. And David, you have recently been opining on inflationitis for governments and scarcity. You see, I read all your shit. Okay. And inflationitis and scarcity. So how does that play out here? And does it have to play the same way it did there? And I was thinking when Kyla was talking about how David Axelrod had said once that, when they were running against Romney, when Obama was running against Romney in 2012, they had a bad economy and people were unhappy. And they changed the subject to whether or not you had a good economy to who was your best advocate in this shitty economy. Was it the hedge fund owner, Romney, or was it the Democratic fighter for you, Barack Obama? And in that way, they got themselves through a bad economy. Why can't the Liberals play that same card here?
Because Poilievre's not Romney.
Well, I think there's a few factors. One is, running for re-election in the U.S. after 4 years is different than running for re-election for the fourth time after a decade. I think there's just that alone probably makes it even harder, especially if Justin Trudeau's Liberal leader in that election, and just time, has an effect. You know that better than anybody.
Yes, I do. Do you want to see the scars? I'll start taking my clothes off.
So I think that's one big factor. But I think importantly, though, and this is where I think, to your point, Obama was able to make that case because he was able to change the narrative and the frame to a place where people believed he was there and he could stand up. He had empathy. He could defend the interests of the key people he needed to come out and vote. In the case of Justin Trudeau and the Liberals right now, their brand is so the opposite of defending your right to afford your life. On your other podcast, David, you talk, Corey tonight talks about the carbon tax. Just this week, Scott was talking about it too. And that is the truth, that as much as people, as much as most people get most of the money back, they don't believe it. And if you stand by a government
they have to spend the money
hasn't
first,
defended
and then
your
it's
ability
like they get
to
their
afford
change.
your life, then that's the biggest hurdle. I mean, I made
like getting your
comparisons in the
change
piece
from
I
your
wrote
tax.
about why Doug Ford and in
here's a 20. Actually, it only cost $18. Here's your change back. Like you have to pay first to get it back. So it's like the lead time between when they pay it and when they get it back. It's like it doesn't feel like they're getting more.
Nova Scotia right now, Tim Houston, the premier there, is looking like he's going to be reelected, maybe with a larger margin than he got in his first election, and they will buck the trends. I mean, Doug Ford still has a road to go before he's secure in his reelection. But literally everything that Doug Ford does is decided and thought through the frame of, is this good for taxpayers? I will do zero decisions that are perceived to be an increase in their cost of living. I mean, I know there are supporters of a bottle deposit system in the province of Ontario who are befuddled that Doug Ford won't move it forward, but he fundamentally believes it's going to be seen as a tax on people. That deposit they're going to pay is going to be seen as a tax. So he refuses to even think about that. And so he's protected himself in a way from this inflationitis by being so focused on that you can't question his sincerity and look to the alternatives and say, well, there's a better option on that. And Bonnie Crombie's trying to fight on that field with a tax cut proposal now, but I think she's still
The
up
Ford's
against
just
the
they're
perception that Doug
like
Ford, if that's
touched by the
most
Fed.
important
They just-
issue,
they
you will likely think Doug
keep
Ford
getting
is more
away
likely
with
to
it.
be on your side.
Kyla, I'm just going to say this. Neither Trump nor Poilievre is going to do anything about affordability. There is nothing they can do about affordability. Do people think that they will make life affordable, or are they just punishing the people who've presided over this period of unaffordability?
B.
I think they look different in Canada and the US. I think that there is a segment of the American population that are like true believers of Donald Trump, and they really think that he created the economy that existed when he was president, and that he's a good businessman, and that he's going to recreate that environment. I don't think we have there. You know, there's Poilievre has, you know, some fans. I think there's much less of that like cult of personality around him. I think that he is more so viewed as the natural alternative to Justin Trudeau, and a fighter at that. But when I tested what people think the actual results will be of a Poilievre government, most people don't expect that much change. And I think that goes back to just a lot of the cynicism that people have around politics and our politicians, and not necessarily having that high of expectations. But where he probably differs a lot in perception versus Justin Trudeau is at least being focused on those issues. And so maybe there will be marginal gains, and that will be better than at least someone that as people perceive it, deny that it's a problem, or ignore it as a problem, or don't speak to it or talk about it. It just is not as much viewed as something that Justin Trudeau is hyperfixated on.
So, in case you haven't noticed, seaports on the West Coast are shut down. Basically, dock
Not
workers
anymore.
issued a strike notice, and management locked them out.
I think they're
The Port of
back
Montreal,
open as of
meanwhile,
now.
is effectively operating at half capacity.
Conservatives, as much as they are likely to win the next.
No effect will spread through belief and a candidate allowed to go on. What do you think, David? Is Poilievre a candidate of hope for people, or is he just benefiting from anger?
There's some hope for some people who look at their outcomes and say it can't get worse, and so it can only get better. There's an optimism in there, but I do think a lot of it is punishing the incumbent, right? I look at the correlation between how people feel about Justin Trudeau and their likelihood to vote Liberal, and it's almost a perfect correlation, right? Like you almost, there are no people who say I like him who aren't voting for him, or people who don't like him who are, right? Like it's so strong, and that tells me it's a lot about throwing the bums out than embracing the Poilievre agenda, which is why I think the Conservatives, as much as they are likely to win the next election, are setting themselves up for a really difficult post-election period where their expectations of delivery, even if people aren't fully believing that things can fundamentally get better, there's still going to be an expectation, right? And you're already seeing evidence in the UK.
Or even if there's not an expectation,
a government that,
if it doesn't get better, people are just going to get pissed at you.
Become as unpopular as
because now you're in charge and you're responsible.
Right? And the New Statesman, an interesting article called, you know, the Labour victory in the UK a loveless victory. That it was simply a rejection of the old guard, and not really an embrace and love of the new one. And I do think that there is a subset of the new Conservative voter who isn't in love with Pierre Poilievre, who isn't excited, enthusiastic, but what's pushing them there is very much a desire for change and a rejection of Justin Trudeau's agenda right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if they're in the 40s, they're definitely getting the votes of people who are not inherently conservative in Canada, right?
Yeah,
absolutely.
I would add to David is a lot of people don't know anything about Pierre Poilievre. It's not even just that they're like kind of mild, is they just know that he is the person running against Justin Trudeau. And this has kind of been the subject of my rantings to all my friends and family, is that election results are not necessarily the best indicator of a broader public opinion. You can overread what it means and what it means about people's values and what they want. And I would say that horse race is kind of the same. You could look at where Pierre Poilievre is in the polls right now and assume that that means people love him. And that's not the case. It's just they really dislike Justin Trudeau and they're really ready for change.
Yeah. Many governments overread their mandate. Okay?
I mean, just David, quickly, the glue holding this new Conservative coalition together is Justin Trudeau, and their feelings towards him. It is not much else. So the moment he is out of the picture, which is why I've argued, not because I think
the He-Man Trudeau haters
needs
club
to go. It's more of looking at the data. I say if the Liberals want a path back, they need to get the thing that's ripping their own coalition apart and holding the Conservative one together out of the way. And until that happens, I don't think there's a reason for them to be.
Also, if there's any Liberals watching, don't use that. Don't steal that, because that just sounds too cool. There's gonna be too large of a segment of the population who's like, yeah, that sounds sick.
All right.
And that new preference.
So, Coletto, there'll be a lot of Liberals listening to this show. We're going to talk about leadership now, so let me just get this out of the way. Do you have any personal animus toward Justin Trudeau, or are you a conservative or something?
I'm not. In fact, only a few years.
Also, yes. Also, this stupid TrueAnon talking point. Coletto's not in the bag of deep like for like big conservative, and pointing out that he went to CSFN like 3 years ago is not evidence of anything. My favorite was like people were pointing out he went to CSFN. He did a panel where they're asking like, what should conservatives do to try and improve their like polling, like how to get more people to like the conservatives. And then people are pointing out that some of his advice the conservatives had started doing, and now they're doing better in the polls, which they were then suggesting that meant that because they had taken Coletto's advice, that he was somehow manipulating the polls to make it better. And I'm like, or stay with me, a pollster gave them advice on how to do better in their polling. They took the advice and did better in polling. Like, come on, guys. Come on. Think about it. Use your heads.
Years ago, everyone thought I was a liberal because I, the business partners with Bruce Anderson, and now, this is part of the game where the people who like your numbers think you're with them, and the people who don't think you're against them.
Right.
But no, I've never met the Prime Minister. I don't know him. I just look at data.
My favorite are the TrueAnons who are like convinced David Cochran's in the bag for the Conservatives, which is like,
so let's talk about it. So we now know
you've gone way too far. You need to come back home.
We now know that the Biden campaign people were sitting on data that showed that Trump was going to win 400 electoral votes. It was
touching grass isn't enough. We need to put you in like a full body mud bath, so it's just your face sticking out of the earth, so that you could like. We really need to ground you a little bit more if you've gone that far.
Just going to be a massive beating, and it puts great context for me around Nancy Pelosi sitting in Biden's house and saying, "Get Mike Donlin on the phone." Right? Because it was just they were bullshitting him, obviously, about what the situation was. But so Harris lost, but closely. Right? Very different race than 400 electoral votes would have been. So if Trudeau were to leave, what's the potential for the Liberal Party?
So, again, first I'm just going to put a big asterisk about everything I'm going to say, which is like, David, you're BSing me. Like, it is hard to you know this, and we all know this, we're all pollsters, to measure hypotheticals, right? The public, to Kyla's point exactly, isn't giving this a lot of thought. They haven't imagined what, the next leader might look like, but all they know is what they don't like about the current one and the situation. And so when we ask people, would you be, people who are not open to voting Liberal today, and by the way, only about 38% of Canadians say they're open to voting Liberal. That is as low an accessible voter pool that I have seen, probably going all the way back to 2011, like when it bottomed out, right? And you can imagine it's about that.
Not great, Jerry.
You now have so few people relative to where the Liberal Party normally is, which is a party that should get at least half of
it
people.
It ran 55-60 in the 90s, by the way.
Exactly, right? Those days are long gone, at least in the current scenario. And so when you ask people who say, no, I'm not open to voting Liberal today, well, if Justin Trudeau stepped away, would you be? That number goes up to 45, right? So it adds about 5 to 7 points. Still not back
that much.
to over the 50s, But that's in the context where people are just, not really, can't feel what it's like to not have the prime minister in the forward view, right? So I do think, my answer is always, it's hard to predict how people are going to react to it. But I can imagine the sense of relief that will come over the country the day after that the prime minister announces, if he does, that he is stepping down and won't be running in the next election. Because I think for the first time in many years, most of that public will be able to say, okay, so what's next? And it doesn't mean that who comes after Justin Trudeau is going to be any better or have a better shot at making the Liberals more competitive. But at least there's a chance that they can. And if I'm a Liberal, that is my hope. If I'm somebody who doesn't agree with Pierre Poilievre's agenda and doesn't want to see the Conservatives with a massive majority government free to do whatever it pretty much wants, that's got to be in the calculus as you think about the future.
We need to build millions of homes, but we're already facing an energy shortage. As demand grows and we look to diversify our energy mix, we need to explore additional options for clean, renewable energy. Here's how Canada's forest sector is helping. By converting biomass, such as wood chips, sawdust, and bark, materials that might otherwise be considered waste, into bioenergy, our forest sector is creating a sustainable energy solution that can help reduce reliance on fossil fuels. In forest-rich countries like Sweden, district heating systems powered by biomass are already widely used to heat entire cities. And even here at home, the Atikokan power plant in Ontario was recently converted from coal-fired generation to 100% biomass, providing renewable energy that feeds directly into the grid and can be dispatched whenever Ontario's power system needs it. As government explores ways to move to cleaner sources of energy, incentivizing industry to adopt wood-based bioenergy could transform the way we do business, providing renewable, reliable energy for both urban and remote communities, while helping other parts of our economy decarbonize. And because Canada is recognized as a global leader in how we manage our forests, Canadians can be assured that transition is being scaled in a way that will keep our forests as forests forever. Our world is changing. So is Canadian forestry. It's time we made the most of this renewable resource. For more information, visit forestryforthefuture.ca.
Yes. 3 more.
So, Kyla, let me phrase this slightly differently to you. Because even though you're just as data-driven as David is, you are a partisan. You are a self-proclaimed partisan Liberal. And so I am one also. And so my fear about the election is that the Liberals are going to get less than 20% of the vote. My hope under a different leader would be that we would get 30% of the vote. How likely are either one of those prospects, do you think?
I feel like I'm going to say something that is like sacrilege as a partisan, which is like, we always want to say, we're going to win, we want to win. There's also an alternative route for the Liberals right now, which is like, we need to lose less bad. We need to continue to exist.
That's what I said about my hope is 30%, right?
Yeah. And I think that the addition of a different leader, it creates that path, I think. Right now, we are in a dynamic where people want an outlet, like they want to punish Justin Trudeau. And if you take away the necessity to, I don't think the feeling and the approval of the Liberal Party itself is not as negative as it is for Justin Trudeau personally. I think him stepping aside takes away some of that like bloodletting, some of that feeling. And then instead maybe creates the opportunity of like, maybe we don't want to give Pierre Poilievre the keys to the kingdom. Maybe it gives you license to vote for the Liberals. It starts to change the calculation. I don't know that it makes the Liberals win, but might create an environment where it's, not a decimation.
And David, can I just say one thing? I always say this too. The Liberals barely won the last 2 federal elections, right? It doesn't take much. Like a 20-point margin is cataclysmically bad, right? But a 5-point Conservative win might give them a majority, but it might, depending on the split of the vote and where it happens. And so what I mean, what does, and this is the question I would ask of the Prime Minister, why do you believe you can do what no incumbent in the world has done, which is increase your vote share from the last election, given that you have been in office for 10 years and you're facing the same kind of economic and social pressures that all of them have faced, right? Kamala Harris, she wasn't the incumbent, but actually was very, very successful. I think, her vote, the Democratic vote share dropped, but not nearly as much as the average we've seen in other parts of the world. David Eby held on, but saw a significant drop in his vote. So there it is. And I actually think that Tim Houston may be the exception to the rule that we might see in 2024, where an incumbent actually gains vote share. But again, what is it that Justin Trudeau has in his back pocket that allows the party to do what no one else has been able to do?
I'm the best.
Right.
I'm the best fisherman.
Since we're on the subject, what kind of leadership are people looking for? It's pretty easy to look at the U.S. result and look at a situation where the economy seems to, a lot of people feel the economy is not working for them. The world seems like a more dangerous and unstable place with Russia, China, wars going on in different places. And that Trump was the strong man leader. And that in times like that, people look for strong men leaders. And they don't have to be male, I guess. You can imagine Margaret Thatcher, but that type of leadership. Is that a correct conclusion, Kyla? Is that and does Poilievre exemplify that in Canada?
Yeah, I think to an extent, I think that he does bring that. I don't know that people think of Pierre Poilievre as like a strong man type, but he's definitely assertive and he's definitely confident.
Well,
and
I don't know whose data, Kyla. Just a second. I don't know whose data I saw, and it would have been probably one of your twos, that showed that people think Poilievre much better equipped to deal with Trump than Trudeau. So just carry on.
Yeah, I think again, I think it's in a context of what are Justin Trudeau's perceived weaknesses, and then I think that Pierre Poilievre fulfills some of those. So they're kind of like a perfect. He's sort of the perfect answer to Justin Trudeau. And do I think like a very Trumpy figure would be as successful? Like we have our own politics and we have our own culture. I think that Pierre Poilievre is probably almost as far to that persona as I don't know, to me, it feels very much the Canadian version. And I think when he is assertive and the way that he fights against Justin Trudeau, all of those things I think are seen as being so different from Justin Trudeau, who kind of meanders around the point. And so I think that confidence in an environment where our economy feels so out of people's controls and people's own economic situations feel so out of their controls, I think that like assertion does feel comforting. But I think we can overstate a little bit the importance of the style, and there's also the element of like attention and being someone that can communicate in a way that's a little different, that maybe doesn't just sound like every other politician. And I think Pierre Poilievre has a little bit of that as well. I think he definitely does, to me at least, feel like he has the very politician-y feel, but he does speak differently and he is more forceful, and a lot of that is, I think, reflective of how people talk about politics in their regular life. Like in some qualitative research that I had done, I had tested things that I thought were the worst examples of him being kind of a jerk in the House, and people didn't care. And you realize how much, like how much people aren't just like soft and perfectly professional and always using the right words in their own lives. And I think that's why, at least at this point in time, I think eventually there will be a point where that rubs people the wrong way, but at this point in time, it's not really offending. And I think that's kind of the case for enough voters for Donald Trump as well. I had read a quote earlier today of like
where'd my clothes go?
Woman. So the classic example of like how are Hispanics voting for him?
The hell?
It's something along the lines of like Democrats always say the right words and they don't do anything.
What happened to my clothes?
Donald Trump doesn't have the right words all the time, but he does stuff. And so I
Why am I
felt
naked?
like that was very relevant to our kind of broader political environment, both here and there.
The hell?
December is around the corner, hurly-burlyites, and in the world of political commentary, you know what that means? It'll soon be the season of a year in reviews. Well, I'm going early, and there's no surprise here. Inflation is one of my top picks for 2024 because it has changed the game from politics and policy to the economy and consumer confidence. Our sponsor, Fidelity Investments Canada, does a lot of research on inflation, and they want to share some data on how it's impacting Canadians' retirement security. Driven by the rising cost of living, the share of Canadians reporting a positive outlook on retirement is declining. 4 in 10 say they'll have to retire later than originally expected. For those already in retirement, 1 in 3 say their income is not enough to maintain their pre-retirement standard of living, with 6 in 10 retirees adding that they support adult children financially. There is some good news, though. Canadian pre-retirees and retirees with financial advice say that a written financial plan and investments make them feel better prepared for post-work life than those without those things.
I think, though, that there's this Celinda Lake, a Democratic pollster, Kyla, you probably know her, tweeted something the other day, or someone paraphrased her, and they said she was doing focus groups in the United States, and when you'd ask people, what's Trump's economic
Rex
plan?
161. Sorry, I don't know why I didn't do the sound off
and deportation, immigration, right? And then they'd ask, what's Harris's economic plan? And they said something like welfare, and then blah, blah, blah. I don't know. It's not really clear, right? What I think people are looking for today, in part because of the news media ecosystem that is a mess and fragmented, but also because it just works better, is simplicity and clarity, right, David? And we're starting to do some polling with The Logic, and we did this survey that befuddled me, but then proved the point that I think you've been making more than anybody else, which is when you ask Canadians, do you have a clear sense of what each of the parties and leaders would do if elected on the economy?
No.
And for a government that's been in office for 10 years, more people thought they had a good sense of what Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives would do if elected than what Justin Trudeau and the Liberals would do.
That's a bad metric.
So as much as everybody can criticize Poilievre for not having details and a detailed plan, he's got clarity in a way that the Liberal government doesn't on how do you solve the fundamental questions that people are asking today. And I come back to the fact that Doug Ford has an answer.
Or have a job that depends on them.
And Tim Houston have answers.
Not saying that.
And that's why they are not yet being pulled down by what I described as this inflationitis.
Kyla, you seem to be agreeing vigorously with that.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I'm like, oh yeah, this is an audio medium. You can't see how like vigorously I'm nodding my head in agreement, but totally. Like you always want, I think what when David taught me in the political management program, what we talk about is like the ballot question. When you go into the ballot box, what is the one thing that you want voters to think about? And
oh God,
they have to at least be able to fill in the blank. And I think a big part of the challenge of what we
the answer to that question
of what we see, and I think this was the case of the Harris campaign, is like, what is that one thing? And I think it would have been spread out across. You wouldn't have had that consistency of people saying that one thing. For some voters, it would be about abortion. For some, it would be, whatever. But I just don't think it's that same degree of clarity. And I think back to one of your points about, the US, they're looking for this kind of strongman. I think part of the challenge in communicating about the kind of threat to democracy type stuff is it is very hard for people to envision changes to institutions because, one, they're not familiar with how their institutions work now. They're displeased with how they work generally. So I think it's kind of hard to pitch people on, Donald Trump is a greater threat to democracy than he was when he already was president. It's like kind of a convoluted story instead of going at just directly at the kind of economic point.
And David, I'm a political scientist. And so, I remember back in 2011, I was much younger. Michael Ignatieff swept me off, my feet with talk of, democratic institutions and rebuilding but man, I thought this guy is going to fall flat, because if he's going to
rise up
Politics 101 lecture to Canadians, they're going to say, no, thanks. I'll just turn on, YouTube and watch what I really want to see.
Right. So, okay, so we're agreed that economics is huge in all of this, but the ad that everybody's talking about in the aftermath of the U.S. election is the trans ad. The ad where the Republicans showed a clip of Harris talking in 2019 when she was running for the Democratic nomination about how she thought that prison inmates who wanted to transition sexually should have that publicly paid for. And the Republicans ran it and ran it and ran it and ran it. What impact do you think it had? Why did it have that impact? And would it work in Canada?
Well, I think in the absence of what appears, or at least what we were told, and maybe we were wrong, and maybe everybody was wrong, of a effective turnout machine among Republicans, that might have been it. That one ad had the effect of consolidating the traditional Republican voter, a Christian conservative, back in, and some of the, more conservative, Hispanic and Latino voters, some in the African American community that wouldn't normally vote Republican were signaled with that issue there, that their cultural conservatism was signaled. So I think it's part turnout and part, speak to that voter group and move them away from economic focus, or give them another reason to embrace Trump. So his record wasn't on moral issues all that great.
Well, I think there was a second part to that ad, which was basically like Kamala Harris is for the they, them. And I think there was also a part of this being like taxpayer funded.
Kamala Harris is for they, them. Trump is for you.
From the analysis that I've seen, it's that part of it that was the relevant part. I'm sure for some people that are like really uncomfortable with trans issues, that was extra motivating. I'm sure that they were voting for Donald Trump anyway, but it's that like values alignment and focus that apparently that had the greater impact. And I think that sort of circles back to the broader America First theme. And you see this in, they're going to spend taxpayer money on gender affirming care for convicts, and they're going to send all your money to Ukraine, and they're going to do all of these different things that are not about you at home struggling. And I think that is probably the part of the message that is kind of more relevant, because I think from the research that I've seen that there's also was sort of some backlash and also just like discomfort with the idea and the way that issue was being used. But I do think that the Harris is for the they, them, whatever. The not you, I think, is the part that is relevant.
Do you think Canadians would be comfortable with that explicitly divisive an advertisement?
I think my instinct wants to say no, but I think I've come to learn that if we believe we are fundamentally different than everybody else, we're going to be proven wrong. We're still human. We have the same instincts. And as much as our social norms protect us in a way that might not protect Americans, they've got different norms.
Refined courts.
I think there's evidence that it could work here. It would be deeply offensive to a lot of people, but enough might say, hey, there's something here that maybe tells me something about the candidates that I didn't know.
Yeah, I think it depends on the example given, but I wouldn't say that couldn't work. I think that there is a contingent of the Canadian electorate that is just like, of the view things are just getting a bit too weird, and that is like one of their central grievances, and a lot of things kind of circle back and refer back to that, and their politics are very informed by that kind of general feeling.
Right.
I think the counterfactual is whether that, again, this is what you asked, David, whether that worked or whether it made a difference in the outcome. I'm not sure, because if that were the case, Scott Moe would have won a larger share of the vote in Saskatchewan, and Blaine Higgs would still be premier, right? That those are issues that were generally popular when you ask people about them. didn't allow them to overcome the fundamentals, which are, bad microeconomic conditions hurt all incumbents. And that's why I still think that Trump was still the favorite. We should have, I'm like your friend Scott Reed, kicking myself for not reminding myself the fundamentals matter, and that was still what we should have expected last Tuesday.
Yeah, the tectonic plates were all moving in the wrong direction for Harris. Israel-Hamas. It's, I think, generally accepted now that may have cost Harris Michigan because of the turnout in the vote.
Do you think it's Israel Hamas or the Palestinians? Do you think it is because people in Michigan cared too much about Hamas? Like the frame, I think the framing there is your problem, Hurley. You could say Israel's war with Hamas, but it's people were upset about how Palestinians were being treated and the bloodshed, the death, and their perceived lack of action from the administration to stop it.
Count in Dearborn, Michigan, I think Jill Stein got 15% of the vote in Dearborn or something like that. Democratic turnout was down. I don't know, and maybe you do, what impact it had in the broader electorate outside of the Muslim concentration in Dearborn there, whether it was an issue in the campaign, and if so, in whose favor? And does it, again, have the potential to be an impactful issue in the Canadian election? Kyla, do you want to start?
Yeah.
No one's jumping on that one.
I was looking at some polling earlier today. We had tested a question exclusively of Harris voters that basically was like an agree disagree of I am going to vote for Harris, but I don't agree with her position on Israel and Gaza. And it was a perfect 50-50 split. Of those with an opinion, it was a perfect 50-50 split between her voters. And those are people that were going to vote and were going to vote for her. I think of the missing 9 million votes. I'm not saying all of those were related to Gaza, but certainly for people that really care about that issue, I think it just became very difficult for them to imagine how to participate in this two-party system, given what is happening there. So did that impact? Obviously, it impacted in third-party vote choice in certain areas. But I also wonder, and it'll take time for us to know, how many people stayed home because of that. And also, it definitely impacted the youth factor in even the before of impressions of Joe Biden. And at that point in time, in our last polling in June, just prior to the debate, we had third parties at like 15% among people under 35. Like it was a huge factor.
David?
Yeah, I think it may have contributed. I think in part it's part of maybe the broader narrative around how Harris and Biden to some extent really did, it's the Bernie Sanders critique. They on that issue and others, economic ones, they moved too far to the center, to the right. They weren't distinctive enough. And I mean, the U.S. position on Israel is one that's different than the Canadian perspective. But I think in Canada, there are hundreds of thousands of Canadians who are eligible to vote who care deeply about this issue on both sides. And is it sufficient to affect the outcome of our election? Maybe in a close election like in the United States. Will it matter if the Conservatives are 20 points ahead? Unlikely. But if it does get more competitive, then to Kyla's point, in a multi-party system like ours, it creates more space for those voters to find a home. And, with the New Democrats more on the Palestinian side and Conservatives really going all in on Israel, it leaves the Liberals to be squeezed and be, which I think is the case for many people who care a lot about this issue, deeply unsatisfying. Regardless of what position you take on this issue. So It could, but I just think right now the environment is one where it's not likely going to be determinate here, but it could have mattered in the United States.
Right. And I guess one of the things that makes me curious about it, and it feeds into your theory, both of you, that the election was more about, that elections are more about punishing the incumbent right now, because there's literally no reason to believe that Trump will have a less supportive policy of Israel than Biden-Harris did.
Yeah, but Biden-Harris were responsible for what was currently happening.
Right? I mean, this is the author of the Muslim ban, and he's a friend of Netanyahu's. So did they not know what the alternative was, or did they not care about what the alternative was?
I think I subscribe to the basic voter behavior theory that you vote for the party you think is best able to handle the issue you care most about. And if neither of them check a box at all, then if that's the issue that matters most, you will either sit out or go vote for a third party as a way to signal your dissatisfaction with it. I think we cannot exit, and for all your listeners and watchers, we cannot exit what I see every day, what we all see every day when we ask questions of Canadians, is just how lacking of context most people have, right? And so if the only thing that really matters in your life is this issue, then you probably aren't thinking about the consequence of it, because you would so hope that the person who was in charge and had the ability to influence the outcome didn't. And so it is much more about punishing that person and the person who followed them than it is about recognizing that the alternative could be way worse.
Getting out in front of
running out of time here, and I want to squeeze in a couple more quick ones here, and one of them is Americans seem to be fatigued with funding the war against Russia, with helping Ukraine in the war against Russia, and Trump was unafraid to be clear that he was going to get America out of that entanglement as quickly as possible. Are Canadians feeling that same fatigue, or can the Ukraine continue to count on Canadians to support governments who back them?
I haven't asked questions about this in a while.
Remember that thing you said about we're not fundamentally
over
different?
The last year, a softening of the resolve, I think, in public opinion.
Don't forget
to
that.
continue to back it. Not to the point where most are on the other side now. I don't think we're seeing that, and it's certainly not. There's some partisan hue to it, but not as deep as it is in the United States. That where Republicans and Democrats have been on largely on opposite sides of that now for a number of years, particularly the elites in those two camps that are pulling their own supporters with them. Because we haven't had a political leader in Canada really call for a fundamental change in our approach, I don't expect public opinion to shift too much on it. I also believe that a lot of public opinion is simply constructed based on what the leaders of a group tell it to do. And right now in Canada, we haven't seen much of it. So as long as that elite consensus more or less holds, I don't expect to see much change in public opinion there.
I think it depends. I think the lens is different in the US because there is a feeling of fatigue with America being kind of the central figure in the world, the world's,
Police.
whatever. But so I think people just want a bit more or a lot more focus at home and to not be worried so much with global conflicts. We do not have that same position in the world. I don't think Canadians are thinking, oh, we're so involved in all of these important, global struggles. And I think there's a bit of that specific relationship with Ukraine and the history that we have. I will be very interested to see how attitudes change as I assume U.S. support dries up or declines significantly, and then to see do Canadians feel like that is a rallying cry, that is now a time for us to do more, or does it start to feel futile? And I don't know. So maybe opinion will stay the same. Maybe I don't really know. I feel like that's one area that is kind of broader context dependent.
All right, I want to make it tangible for you. Trudeau stands up tomorrow and says there was an additional $500 million aid package to Ukraine. do most Canadians say, bang on, put that Putin back in his box? Or do they say, where's my tax cut, you asshole, if you've got $500 million?
I think it depends what Pierre Poilievre says. I really do. I think it matters a lot. I think in a vacuum, David, I think your hypothesis is correct. They would say, where's, our instinct is to actually always say, I'd rather you spend this money at home. We see it when we do research on international development aid or any other kind of policy that's sending money elsewhere. The instinct of people is self-interest to the most part. But there's also a recognition of the threat that Canadians do feel that Russia plays. And in light of, I think, an understanding that Trump is not going to likely be as a big player in that kind of conflict, then I think Canada could, I think there's an audience for Canadians to be convinced that this could be a place we can have a role, even if it's, to Kyla's point, not something we're normally see ourselves as.
As far as
Give me these blue
sending money to other places, I think Ukraine is like the most probably like sympathetic place. Like I think if we were saying that we are sending money for, I don't know, aid to another country, I think that you would get even more of that kind of pushback of like, well, where's my...
How about if we went to the COP conference and announced a $2 billion fund for developing nations to reduce their emissions?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of, yeah.
But here's the thing, David. And people have to know that promise was made. And the only way they would likely know is if somebody opposed it, right? And that's to me the important piece of public opinion, that if Justin Trudeau announced tomorrow we were going to spend an extra $500 million for Ukraine, and no one challenged it, no one asked him questions in the House of Commons, even if the media wrote endless stories about it, odds are 60% of Canadians wouldn't even know he'd done it, right? And so it requires some friction in order for public opinion, I think, to actually form around something like that. So yes, we can hypothesize, but in the world that we see, it requires some debate and the other side to actually engage their own audience to oppose it. And that's what I think happened with immigration as an example.
Yeah, it's also, is that a lot of money? What are we spending now? You can, whenever you give a figure to voters, they don't know how to put it in that context if you don't put it. So, maybe it creates backlash. Maybe it's a nothing response, kind of in between, I guess, what your two options that you gave us were.
So my last question for you is going to be about media, because a lot of people are forwarding around to me an article from the New Republic that tries to explain this election almost entirely on media sourcing. And that the people that voted for Trump were, I guess, in the author's view, I guess, victims of a certain type of journalism, but let me put it more neutrally than that. So I watch regularly CNN. I'm not an MSNBC viewer, but I watch regularly CNN, and I read the New York Times, and I read the Washington Post, and I subscribe to the Substacks, I subscribe to whatever. In the media I consumed, Harris was an exciting choice who was speaking to large and enthusiastic crowds, and who won the debate decisively, and who was running a highly competent campaign. And in the media I consumed, Trump was an unrepentant asshole who was surrounded by the worst people on the planet. His campaign was laughably incompetent. People were walking out on his rallies, and he couldn't even draw them in by the end of the rally. And then he all culminated with a Nazi conclave in Madison Square Garden. Right?
And you lost
That's the campaign, literally, as it was presented to me. But I presume that many Americans, half or maybe more, saw a campaign that was the polar opposite of that, in which Kamala Harris was tied to everything shitty Biden had done and was, aside from those things, incompetent herself, and that she was totally tied up in all this woke business and etc.
Woke business.
Okay? So to what extent is that true in Canada? Now, we have the same decline in mainstream traditional media penetration as the Americans do. We don't have really formats like Joe Rogan that reach vast numbers of people in Canada. I mean, I could put out an
Not
appeal
yet.
for
No.
20 million Canadians to
think we
sign
have that
up
many
for
people. We don't have
the
enough
Hurly
people
Burly,
for
but that we don't have that kind of thing. So it's not identically the same. But is it the case that two voters living in Burlington, Ontario, are consuming such different media that they can be understanding the truth of things completely differently?
Depends what you mean by truth.
I think some of it is different, but I don't know if this is still the case, but I remember reading a report a couple of years ago that Canada is the greatest creator of right-wing misinformation per capita. And a lot of that, the intended audience is Americans, but a lot of that is here at home. And there definitely are a lot of people in this country that are not relying on the CBC. They are relying on different news sources, also different types of TikTok creators, social media influencers, just different types of kind of thought leaders. And they are, if you think of the World Economic Forum, conspiracy theory, like that is not really niche in Canada. So yes. And also there's a lot of like American creators that they like really hate Justin Trudeau. So you can get content created in that way as well. I don't think it's quite the same as the US because our politics is not, we do not have a Hollywoodification of our politics, and it's just not as much of an entertainment source. And like, I don't know, Drake isn't going to be doing a campaign event with Justin Trudeau. Like a lot of it is just different. But the world where we experience
motherfucker stole my
different
clothes.
elections is very real.
He stole my
That isn't even
clothes.
true of just ad placement and the types of digital ads that are being targeted to different
Son of a
voters.
bitch.
Like there's going to be a very different message, and you can be completely blind or seeing a very different version of a campaign from Pierre Poilievre if you exist in. This has always been the case if you exist in Quebec versus English Canada, but also for different age, different demographic groups. Like, yes, the one campaign is over. I think that's been true for a while.
Yeah, if Trudeau got Drake, Poilievre would get Kendrick.
Who told him about that? Who told him about that? Right now, I want to know. I want to know who told him about that beef. Doesn't even make sense.
Look at you, so useful.
I know, eh? Look at me. I pulled that one right out there. I got an LCD sound system reference wrong the other day, so I'm feeling a little sheepish. David.
Hot in my
Yeah, I think it's different, but actually the same, and that's weird. I think our mainstream media is not as partisan. Certainly, that's an obvious statement to say. But I do think that the actual ecosystem has so fragmented that you can be somebody in Burlington across the street and experience a very different world entirely. And that is because of social media, algorithms, and all the things that you could be exposed to simply because you keep clicking on that content and engaging with it. And so when I see data that I have that says 1 in 4 Canadians under 30 say their primary news source is TikTok, and Canadians over the age of 60, most of them don't know what TikTok is, it tells me that not only is there perhaps a partisan and ideological divide in our lived and perceived experiences, but a deep generational one. And so if you're under 30, your perception of the world and what's causing it and driving it could be entirely different than somebody over 60 who still tunes into the news at night, you know, and is a fan of Peter Mansbridge and listens maybe to his podcast, than somebody who might actually be listening to Joe Rogan, if you're under 30, but also just consuming an endless amount of YouTube and TikTok. So I think that yeah, it means campaigning is harder. It means us, even being able to explain outcomes of an election. David, that's what we've been trying to do on this whole episode. And I don't think we can point to one thing that caused everybody to vote the way that they did. I think there's an overriding kind of anti-incumbent bias that exists, but might be driven by so many different factors that are ultimately influenced by my own interest that then causes me to become absorbed by it endlessly, and I don't have to escape it because I choose to live there.
Right. So would you go so far as to say that different media might have played a role? Like, did the right-wing media ecosystem really drive Republican turnout and make people enthusiastic about the importance of this election? And did maybe Democratic-oriented media have the opposite effect on their voters?
Can I just give an example? And I don't know this to be true, but I saw this interview on CNN.
11:30.
On election day with a woman, must have been in her 20s, on like a campus, I think in Arizona. And somebody went up to her and said, "Who'd you vote for?" She said, "Donald Trump." And they said, "Why?" And she said, "Because he will not bring in a national ban on abortion." She said that. Now that's just one case. We're pollsters. We know one case isn't generalizable. But I thought, just as you asked the question, does that young woman live in a household that watches Fox News? Because if she walks by the TV multiple times a day and hears Fox News say, Donald Trump's not going to make abortion illegal. Here's a clip of him saying, I will not bring in a ban. Then for that young woman who is maybe more informed by what her household is watching, and if it's Fox News, then yeah, that absolutely informed her view than had she been watching Rachel Maddow on MSNBC for an entire election season. So I do think it has a big impact. It's framing the election in fundamental different ways. It's why I probably felt more bullish on Harris than I should have been, because I consume, like you, David, the exact same media. I don't watch Fox News, and so I don't know what they're saying about the election that might have informed people in a different way. It might have given me better insights into what was happening.
Yeah. Kyla, should Harris have done Rogan? Or would it have made no difference?
1,000% she should have done Rogan.
I think she should have done, but I don't know if it would have done well.
Would she have won if she had done Rogan? I don't know. I think that it's not just Rogan, though. It's like all the podcasts doing media. She hadn't done an interview. And at the time, I was sort of persuaded by the journalists are being precious about her not doing interviews with them, and she's doing other things.
That's how you test them.
To persuasion.
If they can't handle us, then how are they going to handle power?
And there's part of me that still kind of feels like that. I don't think she should have been prioritizing the New York Times editorial board or whatever. But I think a big part of Joe Rogan specifically, but also all of these kind of podcasters, a big part of their appeal is just kind of people showing up and kind of being brave enough to have these conversations that go, wherever. And I think that in a world where Democrats maybe seem like too pure in a way, they can't get down in the dirt with regular people. They don't want to answer hard questions. They don't want to stoop to, to the Joe Rogans or to the whatever. I think it actually would have been very impactful for her to show up and show that degree of kind of bravery. And I think a lot of people watched the Trump interview and were like, oh, what a failure this is doing. Joe Rogan actually just did a huge gift to the Democratic Party because he was incoherent and he didn't make sense. And in the eye of, I think, a lot of people that watched that interview, which had an enormous audience, it was like, well, he showed up and he had this conversation and then eventually Joe Rogan endorsed him. And I think that's the case for all of those different podcasts. It's like being willing to have conversations that would maybe make the most progressive Democratic activists kind of uncomfortable, not necessarily in what they say, but in the platforms that they're working with. And just as progressives or liberals, we kind of have to figure out that tension to, maybe be a little less pure in who we're talking to, not necessarily the voters that we're directing our
normal.
message to, but even just the platforms that we exist on. And
talk like a human being.
Yeah, she absolutely should have done it.
Science.
I saw a poll earlier today that this is probably overstated, but it was a third of men 18 to 34 had watched the full. They said that they watched the full Rogan interview, and a lot more that had seen clips or parts. Probably an over report, but just the impact of that is just enormous. And the alternative would be like Harris's appearance on Call Her Daddy. They're like being framed as like alternatives, not the same thing. The audience sizes are completely different.
They spent so much money on that too.
And David, like,
which was nuts.
One of Harris's primary arguments was that Donald Trump is not in it for you. He's in it for himself, right? And so implicit in that is that I respect you. I respect, but if I'm not willing to show up where you are, then that is a challenge to that, right? And I think this narrative around...
I'm already judging you because you're there.
Yeah, and therefore I'm not going to go and talk to you, right? Which is why the Pete Buttigieg, I'm going to go on Fox News and fight with them, may not convert
Buttigieg went on, I think
hey,
Buttigieg went on a Jubilee. I'm pretty sure that was like one of those like where it's like him versus like 100 different people. Where was that? Yeah, it looks like it. I think that's one of them.
I'm a grandma. I'm a grandma.
Destiny. Was it something else then? Oh, no, there it is.
I currently live in Kentwood, Michigan.
Grand Rapids, Michigan. Hometown in Indiana, and now I live in Michigan. And today I'm surrounded by 25 undecided voters.
Like this is more impressive than Rogan, honestly.
My first claim is Donald Trump is only running for president for himself. Kamala Harris is running for president to make your life better. Morning.
Hello,
How you
good
doing?
morning.
Nice meeting you.
Hi. So I agree with you. I think that Trump is very selfish. I don't think he's doing it for the people. He wants to do it for his own personal needs, or not really sure why, but I do agree Kamala is a prosecutor, so she tries to do it by the book, and she wants to bring justice, she wants to bring equality, and she wants to do it for others. It's not really about her. So I think
Why did you jump in then?
With Kamala,
You seem like you agree with everything.
She's really good, but there's things that have happened in the U.S. that it's like bringing really big conversations due to the fact of some people not agreeing with things that she's allowed. I feel like there's a different way on how we can do things. Just because the U.S. is in debt, 35.7 trillion, I just feel like the way that we make decisions when it comes to money and economy,
Marty, where the hell are you?
Every American in the U.S. should agree with. You know, sometimes decisions are made and money is being spread out in different countries or in different ways, and the people from the U.S., we're still in debt. We're still struggling. We're still paying those taxes. So I just feel like we should meet each other in the middle somewhere, you know, because our opinion really matters. With Trump, though, he never cared. So.
Yeah. So I feel like kind of what I'm hearing you say is you agree that Trump is in it for himself and that she's in it to make things better.
Yep.
But that still might not decide how an election ought to go because of frustration about how things are right now.
Exactly.
Is that fair? I think part of what I would say, I don't disagree that we got a lot of problems right now, right? I think part of what I would say is that every election then is about what happens next, right? And it's not that anybody's got an easy fix for some of the problems you just named. They're huge problems. That's why they're still there. Otherwise, somebody would fix them.
And walks to,
the case I want to make is that she's going to be better able to address them, even if there's no like magic wand on some of this stuff. Because she cares more, and because she has more specific ideas that.
No.
I currently live in Kentwood, Michigan.
Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Vicksburg, Michigan.
Whatever.
And I'm an undecided voter.
But like that was like, see how he was just talking to her like a normal human being, and having like a sustained conversation with her rather than giving her some sound bites.
you respect me enough to show up on the place I watch. Because many Americans may never have seen much of Harris because she never appeared only in negative framing on the things that they watch. And so if you're going to run on being respectful and being there for everybody, I think you got to show up and be
go
there for
to where
everybody
the
at the same
audience
time.
is.
Great. Excellent. Thank you both so much. We've gone over time, but it was such an interesting conversation, and I appreciate you probably had to bend your schedules to do it. But it was such an interesting conversation, so thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. Really interesting. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail, Forestry for the Future, and Fidelity Investments Canada. I want to thank all you hurly-burlyites out there who watched or listened to the show, and of course, our guests again, Kyla and David. Come back next week. We'll have more hurly-burly, but I doubt it'll be as good as this one. Sorry to say. See you then.
Hurly-burly.
Case in this country where
Are you ready for good talk?
Okay, what am I gonna do now? Should we go forage? Yeah, let's go.
And hello there, Peter Mansbridge here with Chantal Hébert and Bruce Anderson. It's your Friday episode of The Bridge, which means good talk, and lots of good talk to come. And we're going to start this way. You know, we have assumed for, I guess, the last 3.5 years that the election would be in the fourth year next year. That's when it's scheduled. That's when most of the talk is about. But now one of the esteemed members of this panel is suggesting, no, let's get at it. Let's get at it now. There's lots of reasons to get at it now. Should be an election now. And there she is to explain her theory on this one. Chantal Hébert.
So calendar-wise, I am not suggesting a Christmas election. It's still 2025. What I am suggesting is to have an election sooner rather than later in 2025, and to have that election happen on a call by the Prime Minister and not on the eventual day, which most observers expect to happen after the next budget when this government is defeated. The reason I got to that reasoning, and I have absolutely no religion on the election date, and I had none until the presidential election. Then I started to think in terms of public policy. I listened to Mr. Trudeau and his ministers explain that they'd seen this before, that they were going to tackle it again, and that they'd done rather well the first time that Donald Trump was president of the United States, all of which is totally true. But then I also watched what's happening in Washington and how some of the new hires for the Trump cabinet are talking openly about Justin Trudeau, who is not in 24-25 the Justin Trudeau who was leading in the polls, looking at 3 years in office, and could command the support of a bipartisan, multi-partisan group to support him in his efforts with Donald Trump. And I came to a couple of conclusions, and this has been, you know, my thinking on this is changed from day to day this week. The first is from a public policy perspective. We will have an election in 2025. There is no getting around that. It will, at the latest, take place next October, meaning we would be in a campaign at the end of the summer. Most of us expected that will come earlier. It will come in the spring. So there's no.
But there's something really important happening in the summer that, from a lot of people I've heard, that worst case scenario is an election over the summer. And I've said this before, and I think Chantal's about to drop it as well.
Here, that is the reality of the calendar. Until that election takes place, there is absolutely no reason why people in Washington who already think that Justin Trudeau isn't such a great person would want to take him seriously. He brings to the table for the challenges that will be coming our way soon very, very little political capital. I'm trying to say politely that the inclination for anyone who is called upon to interact with the current Canadian government or its prime minister is going to be to wait Mr. Trudeau out and see what happens to him in the election. That's already the case in this country, where provinces, premiers, groups are waiting him out. They're basically saying, well, you know, if you show up again this time next year, maybe we'll talk to you and see where we go from there, which puts him and puts the country in a very weak position. I'll give you one example of that weakness. Canada is host of the G7
there it
next
is.
June.
There it is.
That's, luck of the draw, put it this way. It will also be most likely Mr. Trump's first visit to Canada. To prepare to host the G7 summit, it requires having public servants, high-level diplomats, lay the groundwork for the agenda. That is very much tied to the Prime Minister's vision and strategy going into a G7 summit. The way that the calendar is working out politically at this point, we could be weeks or days before that summit takes place in June, and the Prime Minister who might end up chairing that meeting might not be the Prime Minister that any of the civil servants and diplomats picked by the current Prime Minister prepared for. So that, from a public policy perspective, I came as we would be better served with an election earlier rather than later, so that whoever shows up in June, and I'm not saying Pierre Poilievre would be better than Justin Trudeau or the reverse, shows up in June is someone who has a fresh mandate, not someone who is either just coming in and improvising or is someone who is at the very end of his or her shelf life as leader of the current government because an election. Then I started thinking some more and I thought, okay, but wouldn't it also be to the Liberals' advantage to actually election happen sooner rather than later? Oh, yeah, the polls are really bad. For 2 years, Justin Trudeau has been trying and failing to find a rationale and a narrative to bring to Canadians in an election. He has one now. One of his larger success, one that no one quarrels with, has been his handling of the Trump administration in that first term. And for sure, one of the ballot box issues in the upcoming Canadian election will be, who do you want to lead Canada and face the challenges that the next 4 years will bring on the Canada, US, and geopolitical front. So if Mr. Trudeau really wants to go in a campaign with a reason to put the Canadians as to why they should pick him again, and if he wants to be on the offensive and be the one who frames the electoral conversation, it would actually be to his advantage in the circumstances to be the one who actually takes the initiative of calling an election rather than going in that campaign as the lame duck whose government was finally defeated in the House of Commons. And that's basically where I'm at.
Good
Public
points.
policy, good, and eventually politics from the Liberal perspective, better than the alternatives.
Okay, Bruce, what do you make of that argument?
Well, first of all, this is an example of why I love this format more than I used to love At Issue. No disrespect to At Issue. That's a very, very interesting set of thoughts that Chantal put on the table. And when you wrote me yesterday and said that this was something that Chantal wanted to talk about, I thought, yeah, that was an interesting idea. You first said she wants an election now, or she's going to advocate for an election now. And then I was thinking, well, I don't know about that timing. That doesn't make that much sense to me. And of course, then she just
makes a lot of sense.
defused that right out of the gate. But I'm still not quite on the same page as Chantal, but I do think there's a lot in what she says. And let me start by saying I completely agree that Justin Trudeau has been searching for a narrative for 2 years. He has not found one. I absolutely believe that the risks that
don't know if it's coming, folks.
Trump 2.0 poses for Canada are by far the biggest risks that I can recall in the Canada-US relationship. They are many times greater, as I see it, than the risks in the first Trump term. It is like 5x Trump in terms of the direct challenges that this administration will pose to the way that things work in Canada. And so it's a huge, huge political question. What kind of leadership
Yo, Camila, how's it
will
going?
Canada want? This is where I think
Happy
the argument
Saturday.
that Justin Trudeau could find some traction, both has merit, but also
Hell yeah. Did you
it's
just
kind of
follow
hard
me?
to see him being able to do something with it. It has merit because I think Canadians are
I'll follow you
uncertain
back.
at this point whether or not the best approach with Trump and his cabinet picks, very, very controversial ones, we'll get to that, I'm sure, is to show strength or to show a spirit of compromise. Let me put it that way. But essentially, I think people are going to be looking at it and they're going to go, is our best posture to go in there and draw some lines and use some clear language, to be crisp, not just to say, you know, we'll figure it out, we'll get along, we'll find some way to
Because I'm on like
our
a couple of
differences and
starter
arrive at a
packs,
point
so I'm
where
getting
not very
a
much
ton
changes.
of followers constantly. So
I could make the argument based on historical Canadian public opinion that that is what people will want. But equally, the more disruptive Trump's cabinet ministers are, the more disruptive the Trump administration is. You could make the case that what Canadians will rally around is a more vigorous and forceful and crisp defense of Canada's interests, even if they know on some level that that's a bet that could lose. That Trump could
so the last one will
overwhelm
fall. All right, I'll give you a fall
that
back.
language with actions that are harmful to our economy. So I think there's the potential there. The question for me is whether or not Justin Trudeau, at this stage in his political career, has the agility, the boldness, the ability to speak in compelling ways to take advantage of that opportunity. Most of the evidence to me so far is he does not, is that he's got energy, but he doesn't take bold action. He doesn't have agility in the context of recognizing what a pivot really looks like for a population that is screaming, we want something different. Every time he reads that, he delivers something that sounds more like the same, to the ridiculous point that by some measures, Donald Trump is more
I'm going for
popular
like
than Justin
Scottish
Trudeau among Canadians.
sheep
I don't
farmer.
want to go too far with that, but Donald Trump, when we put that ballot of would you vote for Trump or Harris, got about 35, 36% among Canadians. Now, it's a different ballot question than who would you vote for in Canada. But Justin Trudeau's favorables are more like 35, 65 in Canada right now.
Oh yeah.
So I think there is
he's made some
there
wild picks.
to have
I think that was the last one I
different
saw
discussion
too.
about what
I haven't
the
seen
country
any
wants.
new
I don't
ones
think that this
recently.
that the way that Trump 2.0 is turning out is as much opportunity for Poilievre before these cabinet nominations as after. And what I mean by that is I think that if Trump was going to be what people kind of expected of Trump, pushing for tariffs, pushing for economic advantage, acting like a predator,
Secretary.
but kind of predictable.
Great idea.
That probably would have worked significantly to Pierre Poilievre's advantage. People would have looked at him and said, you know what, he'll speak the same language. There won't be this kind of personal tension. He'll be in favor of deregulation, just like Trump is, and maybe that'd be a good thing.
Stewart. No, Department of the Interior,
because
just Trump doesn't understand what Department of the Interior does.
With the kind of shocking appointments that Trump is making,
he heard Interior
I don't
Decorator
think
and
this is clear
Department
an
of the
opportunity for Pierre
Interior.
I think it could become a situation where Canadians start to see this Trump administration unfold and say, what we don't need is somebody who sounds like a junior version of Trump, or somebody who kind of admires Trump, or somebody who's going to go along with Trump. And I'm not saying that it's clear that that's what Poilievre would do, but I think that the chemistry and the dynamic and the political calculus has definitely changed in the wake of those appointments.
Okay, I know that Chantal wants to get in on this. If you're watching on YouTube, you watch Chantal doing a dance around her microphone.
It has gone. Totally.
You're back on the real one now. I'll let you in here in a moment. I just want to say on Bruce's point that I talked to, his last point, I talked to, a number of conservatives before the U.S. election. And almost uniformly, they said the best thing that could happen for Polyev is that Trump doesn't win. Because it's just going to be.
I mean, yeah, I probably would have been better, but I don't even think Trump winning is that bad of a
Trump's not
thing
as
for Polyev.
An opposition to Trump. Anyway, that's history now. That's not the case. We want to talk about the appointments in the cabinet and how they've affected, and one of the big key issues, immigration. But first, Chantal wants to respond to Bruce.
Well, a couple of points. First of all, my premise is not whether Justin Trudeau would have the advantage over Poilievre or Poilievre over Trudeau. I think that's something for Canadians to decide in an election. That election is inevitable. And whether it is Poilievre or Trudeau, I believe that we should select whoever will be doing this sooner rather than later so that that person is prepared to handle those challenges. I am also not saying that I'm taking for granted that Mr. Trudeau is staying. I think we should walk away from that conversation at this point because there are larger fishes to fry than forever speculating about whether he's going to take a walk in the snow on his birthday at Christmas. I am also not saying that a Liberal campaign that would be designed to equate Pierre Poilievre with Donald Trump would be successful. I believe that would be a recipe for disaster for the Liberals. I don't think they can make that stick, especially after what we've seen over the past 2 weeks. The differences between Pierre Poilievre and Donald Trump, if anything, are becoming more stark as a result of all those appointments. What I was thinking about is something that we all saw, which was the free trade election, which was the one election where Canada-US relations dominated the conversation to a level that I have not seen since, and I had not seen before. Now, that election wasn't about John Turner is bad and Brian Mulroney is good, but I spent that campaign, I spent 2 weeks with John Turner, the first two, then I spent 10 days with Ed Broadbent, and then after the debate, I spent the last end of the campaign with Brian Mulroney. I have a good memory for stuff that I've covered. After that first week, with some mishandled announcements from the Liberals on other issues, I can't remember anything except free trade as a debate. Whenever I look at excerpts of that leaders' debate, the only excerpts I see are all about free trade and the free trade deal. Now, what were other issues that did not get discussed because of the free trade thesis? And why Brian Mulroney should have been happy that they were not. One of those was abortion rights. The Morgentaler ruling came in January 88. We went to the polls in the fall of 88 with the situation unresolved by the government. The other issue that was very little discussed is the Meech Lake Accord. There was an asset in Quebec, but was it debated in the election campaign outside Quebec? No, it was not, because we were talking about the FTA.
No, yes,
that was good for the government, as it turned out. And the third issue that was not much discussed was the incoming GST.
Obama almost made him EPA in 2008. He made 2 more picks? Yes, send a link. I didn't see that he made more picks.
The election was called. We already knew that the manufacturer's tax was going to be phased out and the GST.
Oh, yeah, I saw this. This guy's like a climate denier. Formed Council of National Energy, which Trump said will consist of all agencies. Oh, wait, I'll make this bigger. All agencies involved in the permitting, production, generation, distribution, regulation, transportation of energy. So, everything. North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, Trump's pick for Secretary of the Department of Interior, will be the chairman. Chris has been a leading technologist and entrepreneur in energy. Yeah, it's like they're See, the funny one is these are almost like, like from the Democratic perspective, they're bad, but they're the ones they're almost more picks you'd sort of more expect. Like he picked a bunch of billionaire CEOs. That one's not exactly surprising. It's probably not great to have them in charge of the EPA, but it's like, I don't know if it's at the level of Gates.
He was going to come over the course of that successive mandate. So all those issues that were troublesome to a degree for the government kind of faded away because of the larger discussion. Now, the FTA may have justified that conversation, but looking at what's going to be dominating political news over the next 6 months, I suspect that the Trump challenges will eclipse in the Canadian conversation many of the other issues.
You hear about his defense pick, the news reporter who said, "I don't believe in germs and I haven't watched my..." Oh, Jesus.
Okay.
Dan Hexeth, yeah.
Bruce, you get one
I hadn't
minute.
heard he said
Cool.
that, but yeah.
All right. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming from. I'm not sure that it would work out well for the Liberals or poorly for the Conservatives, but I do believe that there's every evidence that this issue of how Canada deals with the United States can become the compelling issue in the coming year. In fact, I think it's almost certain that will be the case because there's so many aspects of it.
So happy I graduated this year,
and because the pugilistic
I don't even know who's
approach of
picked
some
for
of
that
the
yet.
early cabinet appointees
That'll be interesting.
is going to put some issues squarely on the table. And I think that I don't imagine a situation where everybody's going to immediately go, well, we need these guys to handle this, or we need those folks to handle that. But I do think that if politicians kind of firm up their positions, Trudeau and Poilievre in particular, then people will have a choice that they'll find quite compelling and interesting. And it might not mean that the election is only about fatigue with incumbents and the price of food and fuel and housing. I don't know what the right policy approach is. And so I want to be clear that this is above my pay grade to say we should draw a line and say we'll never talk about water, as opposed to
that's wild.
Maybe there is 100-year-long contract about water that helps us with the defense spending commitment, or who knows what, right? So I'm not trying to weigh the policy choices, but I do believe that there will be an appetite for some on the part of a significant number of Canadians. And if you look at the math from the polls, all you're really saying is Justin Trudeau just needs to find 1 in 7 Canadians who isn't prepared to vote for him now and get them to say, I'm going to put a vote for him, even if I don't like him, even if I'm tired of the government, because I'm more confident in the approach that he's presenting.
Nikki Haley is...
My question for him in that context is...
I can't tell if it might be a worse pick than Matt Gates.
As being to say,
for the
just cool down everybody, there's not a big risk here. I don't think that's the right approach if you want to campaign for a renewed mandate of leadership in the next year around these Trump appointments and the Trump administration. I think it requires ringing the alarm bell and saying, here are the issues at play. Here's the position that we're going to take. You can be with us or you can be against us, but we're prosecuting that. And we're not trying to paint Poilievre as Trump because that just sounds like political rhetoric, but you're forcing him into the town square. You're forcing him to out of the position where he can even ignore all these calls for a security clearance.
Not sure what's
You're
different.
making him play like a grown-up, and I don't think that that's really.
I think Treasury is internal, like government budgeting and stuff, and then commerce is like business.
Happened so far. Best evidence almost this week on the Remembrance Day ceremonies, which we might come to. So yeah, I'm pretty much where Chantal is on this in terms of the way the mood of the country might go.
All right, we're going to take our first break. There's lots more on this to come, and we'll get at it right after this.
Yeah, because that's well, I mean, I think they're probably in charge of sanctions. Because commerce is like,
and welcome back. You're listening to Good Talk,
like domestic trade, and then Treasury Board probably handles
like your favorite podcast platform, or you're watching us
foreign trade, maybe
on our YouTube channel. Bruce
that might be the
Anderson,
difference.
Chantilly Bear with me.
I'd have to look it up.
I'm Peter Mansbridge. Okay. You've both mentioned the some of the cabinet choices that Donald Trump has made and have become clear in the last week.
Blobfish.
And others rumored to be. To say they're bizarre would not be a stretch. I think everybody was ready for something from Trump, but this sort of one after another of strange choices. RFK in health. Tulsi Gabbard in national intelligence. Matt Gaetz as Attorney General.
I don't even think he's an attorney.
Those have all happened. They've all been. He has nominated them, and they'll have to go through one assumes some kind of a confirmation process that may not even happen. But let's assume it does. And the rumors continue. I heard last night somebody suggesting seriously that Steve Bannon, who's just got out of jail, could be the next director of the FBI. I mean, really? What do these kind of choices do to this? The question that we're raising.
He doesn't have any legal experience. I don't know if the Steve Bannon one is true.
Does it mean anything in particular to us?
May have just been blue skying some insane,
all the other countries that the United States is trying to have relationships with, or does have relationships with.
Holy shit! What is this fish?
Bruce, you start us on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it does. We have such a high degree of integration of our economy, such an important kind of security partnership, among other things, that these do pose much bigger risks for us, and they're more difficult for us to manage, because I think the mood surrounding Trump's victory, even if one wants to make the case that he only won,
he just seems to be
like million more votes. And so lots of Americans
whoever can talk to him right before he makes the decision will get it.
The House, the Senate, the Supreme Court,
or who's been
the White
sucking
House,
up to him most.
And in the U.S. system,
that was the funny thing when when we watched that
before any material
on the Thursday stream, when we watched that the Phantom of Mar-a-Lago from Vic Berger, when they were doing those shots of all the parties he was holding right after the election, and right after he lost and after January 6th. Guess who was there in the crowd clapping for Trump? Pete Hegseth. And I think also there's a clip of... No, I don't know. I can't remember if there's a clip of Tulsi Gabbard.
Effort to distract him or dislodge the path that he's on has any impact. That's a long period of time in which the issues that matter to us are at stake. I think that the appointment of Homan is he's already started talking about Canada as an important security risk on the border. He's talking about how many people have been trying to smuggle people into the United States across the Canadian border, and how that's going to be an important priority for him. We haven't really had that situation develop in the past. We've had a spirit of, these are difficult issues. Let's try to figure them out together. That doesn't sound like this. And we also can imagine that as Homan tries to deport millions of people who are living in the United States, undocumented immigrants, that a good number of those people are going to try to come into Canada. And our immigration minister, Mark Miller, has already had to be on the record a couple of times making it known that this is something that we're going to need to find out how to resist. I think that's an important one. I think that the defense secretary, being somebody who really lacks what you would expect,
I guess maybe the Supreme
to have in
Court
terms
would
of the
let him,
experience and the gravitas for that kind of role,
a literal king,
that can be a combustible figure in the context of global geosecurity, Canada, U.S. and North American security. I think Ambassador Huckabee to Israel makes the Middle East situation and our position in it more complex and it was already pretty complex. I think Tulsi Gabbard is going to raise the eyebrows among the other four eyes in terms of the intelligence sharing agreements that we have, and so should be the case. I think RFK saying that he's going to, or at least he campaigned on the idea of stopping research and development on new drugs for 8 years.
What?
That's a huge and quite stunning idea that a president would put someone like that in charge of the massive apparatus of health and human services in the United States. It says that to me. Sure, we need a cabinet committee, and it's great that cabinet committee is meeting, but this is a prime minister level set of issues. And this is not going to be dealt with. All of these things are not going to be dealt with on the basis of bilateral negotiations between our trade minister and the counterpart in the United States, our foreign affairs minister, and Marco Rubio, presuming that he's going to be the Secretary of State. This is at the absolute top leadership level, and it's a 5-alarm fire in terms of risks for Canadians and our public policy dynamic. Because of these appointments. And these appointments, make no mistake, in my view, they suggest that Trump is spiking the ball. He's saying, I won this election and I'm going to run the table the way I want it, and nobody better stand in my way.
The 5-alarm fire description does lay weight to what Chantal was talking about earlier. In terms of, if it's a 5-alarm fire, it's time.
We need to appoint a fire chief that's got water. Yes, whoever that person is needs that mandate. It's not the issue isn't we're going to change because we need to change the fire person. The issue is we need to give whoever is prime minister a full tank of water, and that only comes in the shape of a mandate to govern Canada for the next at least 2-3 years.
Never underestimate people's ability
if not 4, in case of another minority government. We can't just sit and wait and say, well, will they survive next week, or will we be doing this and that? I think these cabinet appointments, let me speak to the big silver lining I see to them. They bring clarity to the issue and kill the notion that many Canadians would have liked to have, that, this is Trump and like everything he said in the campaign doesn't really matter because the last time it wasn't so bad and we did okay. This is not at all the last time. And any experience from the last time saying, but in his first term, that should be banned from the vocabulary of analysis because it is simply not relevant. Yep. That's like analyzing Justin Trudeau based on his father, frankly. It's not.
I even think
irrelevant.
I even think that would be a better comparison. Just
one of the first things that happened was to see this administration gunning for the northern border, because in the end, I suspect that whatever flow of people who are using Canada to go to the U.S. That there is will slow down to a trickle. If you've got a head on your shoulders and you're an irregular migrant, is this really what you want to do? To risk your life to go over to Trump land? I suspect many will decide, I'm staying put. I'm not going to try. It may have been the plan to come to Canada to cross, but I'm staying in Canada. It's a safer place for me and my family. We will see issues in the reverse, though.
That's interesting.
I do think that there will be a lot more people trying to come to us.
Although demographically,
than the first time around.
Not that
and it's going to be difficult to handle, because even if you send signals that we're not, open to welcome whoever wants to come, we have this long border. That we cannot every single day of the week police along every single kilometer. So yes, those issues, but they will be at our end. It's us who should be complaining that our southern border is not safe and it's not policed properly. Because I don't think you should expect this administration to spend a lot of money to keep people inside the United States. I think the way to go about this will be to have border people on the U.S. side look the other way as people walk across to us. So that is going to be a major issue. Bruce talks about, having a cabinet versus prime ministerial responsibilities. Well, here's one. For one, I don't think that anyone in that cabinet committee has in his contact list the people who were appointed this week.
Yes.
That I would.
You know who does? Jamil Javani.
Chrystia Freeland, for all of our network in the U.S., has spent a lot of time with Kennedy or anybody else that's on that list. It's almost impossible to imagine. But the other consequence, we're very big on, people-to-people relationship in government. All these people who were appointed are now going to appoint other people like them. This is not the end. It's not we can go to the second or the third higher up to try to open channels of communications, because they will be replacing anyone that we know that we've dealt with people that we don't usually have had dealings with. And that has serious, serious consequences. But when you take it all together, I see, this notion that because of Kennedy's appointment, we could attract more pharmaceutical R&D to this country. Possibly, but on the scale of the havoc that is about to be wreaked on this industry in the U.S., there is a part in this that is an attempt at normalization. The notion that we will see this as a great opportunity. I wish that were so. I am not someone who likes the chaos theory of politics, and I try not to sit there and say, the end of the world will come tomorrow. But I don't believe that it's going to be just that easy.
Just a sec, Bruce, before I get in there, I just want to underline what Chantal is saying about the American public service. This time round, Trump didn't do it last time because he just wasn't organized, but he supposedly is this time. That they go much deeper down into the public service with their partisan appointments. Traditionally Americans, not just Trump. You can be sure that he will this time round, because if he has an agenda, he wants that agenda to actually happen this time. I don't want to leave this immigration border situation without more comment on it, because let's face it, Trump has said he wants to get rid of 15 million undocumented immigrants. 15 million. Now, where are they going to go? They're going to go back to where they fled because of the abuses that were happening to them there? Or are they going to try and find somewhere else? And, perhaps the easiest with some, suggestions, as Chantal mentioned, easing the traffic flow. Many of them could end up coming to Canada.
Oh, shoot. I forgot.
And we do have this huge undefended border, which we've been proud to, claim as part of the great relationship with the states for decades. We all learned it at school. But now it has the potential of being a huge problem. Even if a small percentage of these immigrants end up coming to Canada, we're talking tens of thousands here, versus where they would be going, which is in effect concentration camps in the United States. So I don't know how ready we are. Bruce, you talked about Mark Miller, who I think has, people have a certain fondness for Miller, and I understand that. But I don't know how ready he is for this, or how ready the government is, or how ready the immigration department is, or the border patrol, because it's an unbelievable task. If anything remotely resembling a movement of immigrants towards Canada takes place.
So long.
Yeah.
Also true for Mexico, by the way. They're not equipped. A lot of the people that Trump has in mind have come from south of Mexico. Mexico's not equipped to deal with millions transiting through its territory and maybe wanting to stay.
Yeah, I'll come to your immigration question in a minute. I just wanted to add one last thought to what Chantal was talking about, which is I had spent my time thinking up until these cabinet appointments started that we were going to have a big enough set of issues just with tariffs and with deregulation. that
Here we
the
go.
risks to Canada of investment flowing not to Canada but to the United States because lower taxes for business and less regulation would be real, and that it would put some wind in the sails of Pierre Poilievre and make life more difficult for incumbent governments who didn't want to move in those directions. But I'm no longer
Martin
thinking
Shkreli
that
for
is
Department
the
of Health.
scenario. I'm right where Chantal is, that this is not kind of a status quo ante, and we'll try to figure out how to align around tariffs and regulations so we don't lose investment. This is a lot more threatening to the idea of cultural norms, of institutional responsibilities and guardrails, and of the role of the institution of government. I think that really what Trump is doing, whether he intends it or not fully, is putting government more in the crosshairs, the idea of government more in the crosshairs of the average American citizen, and sort of making the case that you don't need it. It only gets in your own way. It only costs you more money. It only does things that you don't really care about or want to see happen. On immigration, I don't think if Trump modulates his position at all on the size of the deportation project, it won't be because he's concerned about the impact on immigrant families. It won't be because he's concerned that it feels too brutal. But he might, if he's convinced by rich people and major corporations that it is extraordinarily harmful to their economic interests, that might mean that this becomes something like his wall was. Almost, you talk about it, you do some of it, but you don't really try to do 10 million. I think I saw a quote from Homan the other day where he said, well, obviously the first thing that we're going to do is focus on people who have a criminal background. And then he went on to say, but people who are here illegally shouldn't feel comfortable just because that's going to be our first priority. And it's the first time I kind of wondered, okay, do they have in their minds that they're going to keep talking tough, but they know that, as Scott Galloway said in his podcast the other day, that at some point America will experience a gag reflex on this deportation program if all of a sudden inflation starts to hit, small businesses can't find people to hire, services that people count on in a lot of parts of the country break down.
Where's my horse?
And everybody's looking at Trump and saying, well, we know what caused this. You took people out of the economy that we needed, and now wages are going up for the jobs that remain, and there aren't people that we can find. I think that this version of the Trump administration will be alert to that risk. Again, not because they're prudent, but because the business community that fills their coffers and the billionaire donors will be alert to that risk and will be in their ear on it.
All may be true. Doesn't mean we shouldn't be prepared for that not to happen.
I agree, but I think what you guys are saying about the scale of the problem, given the nature of the border, that's an easy thing to say, but it's an extraordinarily hard thing to imagine how to do.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, just the logistics. Okay, so let's go to, science fiction scenarios of the kind. We deploy our entire armed forces along the border. How does that work? There are miles, I'm sorry, it's my age, kilometers upon kilometers of places where there's no place. If you were deployed there, you'd need to set up camp.
Yeah, there's just nothing there.
You can't police the border from a comfortable, well-heated infrastructure because that's not the nature of the border. So how in the world would you arrive at, trying to keep it controlled enough to avoid these things? And then I don't know how Canadians would react to the sight of families being put in camps, kids separated from parents. How supportive would Canadians really be about shutting down the border as much as possible? That's very much an open question too.
It is.
It can certainly be polarizing. And I think that's, maybe that is part of the master plan, if there is one that you can describe as being a master plan for Trump. I think that's right. I don't know how Canadians would react to it. I think that we've discovered in the last 7 days that we're entering into some pretty uncharted territory. And I think our major allies in other parts of the world have probably come to the same conclusion. It's a good thing that so many countries are meeting. The heads of state are meeting in the coming days. Sometimes these meetings have a kind of a performative and routinized aspect to them, but it can't be a bad thing that they're getting together and they're going to talk about what they're going to do, and maybe share some ideas and strategies.
Just to add to Chantel's point about using the military, if it ever came to that, across the border, got to keep in mind how long our border is and how reduced the Canadian military is in numbers. Like, they can't get people to join, and they're equipped so poorly on all fronts: Air Force, Navy, Army. Gave away all our sleeping bags to the Ukrainians. Things are tough out there on the military front, and then expecting them, if it ever came to that, to have to guard the border.
I feel like I do not need these seeds, but I'm buying them.
Could
anyways,
well be a stretch. Anyway, we're going to take our final break. When we come back, we haven't mentioned one name who's actually really running everything south of the border. If you listen to him, that's Elon Musk. What are we going to do about him? Or is there anything we can do about it? That's that right after this. And welcome back. Peter Mansbridge here with Chantel Hébert and Bruce Anderson. This is good talk for this Friday, and man, this hour has gone quickly. But we do have time to talk about the richest man in the world, and how I think Trump even said this week, we can't get him out of Mar-a-Lago. He's
what just happened?
Chantel Hébert and Bruce Anderson. This is good talk for this Friday, and man, this hour has gone quickly. But we do have time to talk about the richest man in the world, and how I think Trump even said this week, we can't get him out of Mar-a-Lago. He keeps hanging around. I think he was like joking, because he kept inviting him into every possible meeting that he was having this week. What does this mean to us? I mean, listen, he has a Canadian connection. His mother, I think, was born in Saskatchewan. He went to Queens, but he also is not shy about dumping on Canada, and certainly dumping on Trudeau. What is his influence, his clear influence, with Trump mean for us? Chantel?
Short answer, I don't know. I'm curious to see at what time Mr. Trump will decide that Elon Musk is like guests that overstay their welcome, like fish in the fridge. That's not being consumed. I don't think that Donald Trump is the type to want to share the stage for very long with someone who believes that he is just as much of a star as he is. So I really can't answer that. I expect that Mr. Musk will soon be consumed with a lot of pushback from a machine that he does not really know well. I also understand that he has predicted Justin Trudeau's demise, and I'm not sure that hurts Justin Trudeau in this country. To have Elon Musk suddenly order Canadian voters to dump the Prime Minister, maybe a step too far. So the real answer, my answer, I don't know. There are so many appointments to worry about that I have to say that for all the fascination about Elon Musk, it was not the one that attracted my attention the most. I'm more concerned about what happens to Ukraine, what happens to Palestine, what happens to healthcare if there's a pandemic, than I am with his, what I believe will be passing influence on Donald Trump.
Well, Bruce, Chantel's obviously just trying to protect her X account, her Twitter account.
Of course I am. Which a good day. And I plan to, for now, stay on X, because I am not about to leave the place to the crazies.
Well, you may be severely outnumbered.
That's okay. I'm used to them.
He's had her caffeine this morning. I like it. look, I think on a good day, I think of Elon Musk as a kind of a Dr. Evil who got lucky and made a lot of money, but as a cartoonish character. And that's when I'm feeling good that he won't ruin the world. But there are other days where I go, he's ruining the world. And he's going to continue in that direction because Chantal can say, I don't know what's in his heart or, what's in his DNA. And I think that, for me, I've seen enough evidence that what I see is.
No, I don't know how long he's going to have the influence with someone whose DNA and mind I can't fathom either.
Fair enough. But the question of his longevity with Trump, for me, I'd love to think that, and I'm speaking as somebody who has been wrong because I've been optimistic on every single occasion since Donald Trump got into politics. So I am trying to teach myself not to be an optimist and not to say, oh, at some point, this thing that's happening in Trump world will stop happening because Trump will get tired of it, or Trump will, whatever the reason is for hoping that it goes away, that it'll go away. I don't know. And the reason I don't know is Trump loves rich people. He loves having the richest person in the world work for him. He loves having the richest person in the world jump up and down on his stage and wear his paraphernalia. He loves the fact that
Musk doing the
Elon Musk and Twitter
jump.
Twitter, anyway, kind of made Donald Trump a much bigger phenomena than The Apprentice made him. And that X as a platform is now dominated by Trump voices. I mean, I think the three of us are all on it. And every once in a while, I'll just run a little poll just to see what kind of numbers come out. And it's like 75% Trump opinion, at least, that I see. And that's even among people in my feed, which doesn't make any sense, really. So I think this is a great courtier for Trump. The richest man in the world doing his bidding. And I would add that Trump has always had, since he got into politics, an eye on another prize, which is how do I get richer? How do I profit personally and my family profit from my time in public office? And I feel like it was kind of quaint that we were wondering, well, how can he not put his assets in a blind trust? Remember that conversation that went on for months, and he finally just said, no, I'm not doing it.
We were so naive.
And, everybody said, all right, I guess that's the way that's going to work. And then we said, how could he have people visiting and doing business with the U.S. administration staying in his hotel? And he was like, well, that's life. Get on with it. Next. So for me, he's appointed Trump and Vivek Ramaswamy to do this thing on reorganizing government from outside government. So they don't have the same scrutiny and accountability, but they will have a lot of authority. And is there any chance that that's going to be done in a way that's going to create economic opportunities for Donald Trump? Is there any chance that we're going to see that? Is there any chance that we're going to see a debate about that? Are there any checks and balances about that? And so if you happen to believe, as I do, that Donald Trump always has his eye or one eye on that question of how can I get rich out of this? And I'd like somebody to challenge me on that assumption. Then this has to be, and Elon Musk's role in the government has to be part of that equation.
Can I just say on Twitter, on X, I've got a piece tomorrow in the Buzz about about how people are in fact fleeing X or leaving X in significant numbers, not overwhelming numbers, but they are leaving, and because of Musk. And the way, that social media file is kind of bent towards the Trump agenda. Even to the point where you're right, Bruce, the three of us are still on X. But I, at least this week, was looking around. I looked at this blue sky model and trying to sort out whether that's.
I signed up, by the way. The hardest part is the CAPTCHA thing. It's almost impossible to get through and prove that you're a human. But I'm there now.
Just getting
Well, we've often
confounded. That's
thought
why
of that,
there's
That's
only young people.
Yeah, it's an interesting test. Maybe we should do it every week now.
The older people can figure out the captions.
You know how things have changed in the time that we've been covering sort of politics and life in Canada. If you can imagine 20 years ago or 25 years ago, the post office going on strike, that would be like the number one issue in the country, right? Everything would come to a standstill while we discussed the union demands, the impact on the country, the impact on trade, the impact on people being able to talk to each other. So the post office is on strike. And are we talking about it? No.
Nope.
Who's talking about it?
Me.
I'm not sure too many people
I'll
are talking
story out
about
on
it,
Wednesday.
which underlines kind of what's happened with the post office in terms of our lives. It interconnects with the whole issue that we were just talking about in terms of social media. But it is rather remarkable, that change, because I remember those days, as you do, where everything revolved around the issue of the post office being on strike or having labor problems. Anyway, we're up. Our time is up. Another good conversation, single focus today, really, and I think importantly so. I'm glad we had this discussion. I'm glad that Chantal pushed to have it in terms of what all this means, perhaps in terms of our election cycle here in Canada. Anyway, thanks to you both. Thanks to Bruce. Thanks to Chantal. Have a great trip.
Yes, I'm streaming
Chantal's
on
going
YouTube
overseas,
as well.
but she'll be back in time
The whole
for
thing will be
next
there.
week's program.
It should be live. as
I'm
soon as
Peter
I'm done.
Mansbridge. This has
If you wanna
been
go
Good
back and
Talk.
watch it.
Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you again in 7 days on Good Talk.
Take care, guys.
And I'm Left Hand Stu, and it's 12:30 on a Saturday night, so I'm gonna call her and head to bed. Is there anybody up who's streaming that we could drop the four of you off in? Anybody? Oh, there's Igloo. I'll go right into Igloo. Have a good night. Igloo_BC.
Jesus Christ, man. This is...
Alrighty.
Sweet Jesus.
Well,
the caption says brain
have a
worm
good night,
in
everybody.
RFK Jr.'s head, telling him to force Americans
Good
to
night.
drink water
Good
without
luck.
fluoride, cut
Stay
government
safe.
services, and give
Keep your
the
stick
money
on
to
the ice.
billionaire cronies.